Thank you. This is a hybrid meeting of the City Council. Members of the public can view this meeting live on Channel 8, the city's website, and YouTube. Live Spanish translation services are being provided for tonight's council meeting by telephone. Please dial 720-386-9023 and use code 104091 *.
Se ofrecen servicios de interpretación en español para esta reunión del Consejo Municipal por teléfono. Marque el número 720-386-9023 y utilice el código 104091 #.
If you are a council member, please be sure to unmute your microphone when speaking for the broadcast and recording. The city clerk is the host of the Zoom meeting. Speakers will be able to unmute themselves when recognized. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Tonight we have, I would like to invite Dylan Gibson, the city clerk, to make the presentation on the 2022-2023 special election and redistricting plans.
Alrighty, good evening, members of council and the public watching at home. My name is Dylan Gibson. I'm the city clerk for the city of Commerce City. And tonight I'll be presenting on two big projects that the city clerk's office will be handling over the course of the next year and a half. So this will provide an update to returning council members and kind of describe what we're doing for the new council members coming in of these two very important projects. So for the agenda for tonight's presentation, I'm going to provide a background for both the 2022 special election plan and the 2022 to 2023 redistricting plan, do a walkthrough of the representable.org platform that we'll be using to gather community input for our redistricting plan, and then have time at the end for any questions and discussion. So first we'll tackle the special election. So to provide a background, the previous council in 2019 and 2020 began expressing interest in evaluating the current composition of city council. As you all are aware, city council is made up of 9 members. 4 of those members are elected from each of the city's 4 wards. 4 members are elected at large, and the mayor is elected at large. Elections happen in odd-numbered years in November. Council composition hasn't changed since the adoption of the charter by voters in 1970. Previously, Commerce City, whenever it was a second-class city in 1959, it had an election in April of 1960, and its 8 council members at the time then were elected as 2 members from each of the city's 4 wards, just as a fun little historical fact. Commerce City's population growth and socioeconomic makeup has changed drastically since its charter has been adopted. Previous council wanted to explore potential council composition changes that may increase voter representation on council. Staff presented on potential council composition changes to the previous council in February and April of 2021. At the February 2021 presentation, council desired to gather community feedback on the options before moving forward with a possible charter amendment election. Staff worked to evaluate what community feedback action could be taken to facilitate council's desire and timeline for a potential ballot question in 2021. The options that we were able to present was an informal online survey with a short turnaround time and limited opportunity for community feedback in order to reach the 2021 election deadline. The other option was a formal staff-driven survey with outreach conducted for throughout 2021, 2022, and into 2023 for a potential 2023 ballot question election. And then also the third option was a formal survey conducted by a vendor for a 2022 special election. At the April 2021 presentation study session, council wanted a more formal survey with a vendor and preferred to have more community feedback rather than getting the question out to voters in 2021. Staff has been meeting with pollsters throughout 2021 and has selected Corona Insights to conduct our community-wide survey on council composition change. Previous council approved the 2022 budget, which included funds for the community survey and the cost for the special election. Staff has drafted the 2022 special election plan, which was included as part of your agenda packet tonight. So the potential composition changes that staff has come up with after researching the various makeup of the municipalities, both in Colorado and throughout the United States, we have a list of about 6 potential actual council composition changes that we've sent on to the vendor conducting the survey to mold into measurable survey questions that go out to the community in early 2022. So the potential changes to the council composition discussed during the study session presentations back earlier this year are listed here on the slide. So no change, right? Residents don't want any change to council composition, and no special election is needed at that point. The second option would be the current council composition with at-large members having a geographic residency requirement. At-large members would be required to reside within a geographic area, and no 2 at-large members could be from the same general area, and they would still be elected, however, from throughout the entire city. The third option would be an all-ward system with 4 wards. So it will eliminate the at-large members. 2 council members would be elected from each of the city wards, kind of how they did it back in 1959 and 1960 when we changed from a statutory town to a second-class city, as I mentioned a couple slides ago. Another option would be all wards with 8 wards. So it would eliminate at-large members, break the 4 wards out into 8 individual wards, and that would require both amending the council composition and the ward section of the charter. So 2 potential charter changes there. The next option would be an all-at-large system with a geographic residency requirement. So similar to the current composition, but the at-large members would have a geographic residency requirement. This would eliminate the wards and also the need for future redistricting if we didn't have wards. Every member of council would be elected at-large from the entire city, but no at-large members could be from the same geographic area. And this is a little bit more confusing than an all-ward system. All at-large with no geographic residency requirement would eliminate the wards, and at-large members could live anywhere. Some other concepts that council discussed during these study sessions in early 2021 was the role of the mayor. So the potential options there that we could find from how other cities do it would be either no change, we have a mayor, or the concept of a council president, which would be elected among the 9 members at the organizational meeting every 2 years as provided in the charter. So the 9th member, you would eliminate the mayor and have a 9th member of council. That member could either be another ward or another at-large seat added to council. Among the 9 of you, you would elect at each organizational meeting who would be the council president and would share a similar role as the mayor, which is essentially chairing the meetings and some other ceremonial duties that Mr. Hayter discussed at the previous council orientation. So the timeline for the 2022 special election plan is that we are looking at hosting ward-specific meetings throughout January and February of 2022 to engage the community of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what they can expect to receive in their mailbox for these surveys by the end of Q1 2022. So the tentative dates for that, provided that council doesn't have any major changes to our timeline or scheduling, would be doing Ward 1 on January 5th at Eagle Point, Ward 2 on January 19th at Eagle Point, and these are all Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Ward 3 on February 2nd at Bison Ridge at 6 p.m., and Ward 4, February 16th at Bison Ridge. And as long as council doesn't have any strong feelings about changing those dates or the concept of these ward meetings to get residents up to speed of what we're doing for these 2 projects, we would obviously send out calendar invites and very strongly encourage all of you to attend as many of these as you can. Corona Insights, as I mentioned earlier, will be conducting the survey. and we've given Corona the council composition options that we discussed on the previous slide for them to design a measurable survey questions out of those options. They're going to be doing a sample size direct mailing of a mailed survey in both English and in Spanish to the survey sample. And then they'll be putting out what's called a push to web notification in every household's mailbox. Those that are outside the survey sample can still participate in the survey and the options. And Corona is able to separate out the survey sample and the larger community feedback, so council can consider both of those results from the survey. As I mentioned, Corona will be directly mailing those surveys in English and in Spanish. Those will go out, our plan is early 2022. And this hopefully meets the goal of council's strong desire back in early 2021 for community feedback before moving forward with a potential ballot question for a charter amendment. The survey will be typically open for about 1 to 2 months. And we have talked with Corona about oversampling the core city and Spanish-speaking areas, which typically under-respond to surveys. We want to make sure we are doing as much outreach as we can to those that typically don't respond to surveys as those that do. Again, we'll have those ward-specific meetings to discuss the special election, why it's important for everybody, even if you're not in the sample size, to go to that push-to-web mail card link and fill out the survey. We'll hopefully have those results of the survey to council by mid-2022. And at that time, you all would evaluate, based on the survey results, of which option, if any, you would like to put out to voters in November 2022 for a special election. The ballot language would need to be finalized by City Council no later than mid to late August 2022, so I can certify that ballot language to the county clerk for placement on the 2022 ballot. And then if passed, the charter amendment will be codified in December 2022 for implementation in the 2023 election. So that's the 2022 special election plan. The 2022 to 2023 redistricting plan we'll get into now. Kind of a similar background we presented in February 2021 on the redistricting process as the census data the census was concluded and we were waiting on census data. At the time, council directed staff to wait until the 2020 census was completed and the state independent redistricting commissions had their maps approved by the state Supreme Court. The city's population growth has happened regardless of ward boundaries. Most population growth has happened in the north half of the city, leading towards 3 and 4 having larger populations than wards 1 and 2. And more information on the constitutional redistricting requirements and standards can be found in both the redistricting plan, and I'll go over those briefly in this presentation later on. The last redistricting was completed in 2013, so it typically takes municipalities about 2 to 3 years after census is conducted to get state, congressional, House, and state Senate maps done, then for counties and their precincts to redraw boundaries, and then from there, municipalities can redraw their boundaries. So the typical turnaround time, again, is about 2 to 3 years after census is conducted, and we're hitting that mark here. And again, the previous council had strongly desired a lot of community input on this redistricting process. So some of the concepts for redistricting boundaries, specifically at the municipal level, is equal populations. The standard deviation is about plus or minus 10% deviation from the most populated ward to the least populated district or ward. Boundaries cannot be drawn specifically to dilute voting power of minority groups. Districts should be as geographically compact as possible. Districts should be whole. They should not be separated entirely geographically from another part of the district or ward. Boundaries should be preserved. So again, your congressional, your state House and Senate, your county districts and precincts, and then your municipal boundaries should try and keep every single hierarchy of those boundaries whole. And that's, again, why municipalities typically do theirs last. And then community of interest must be preserved. And this is where the majority of our citizen engagement will come from. And we'll be using the representable.org tool, and I'll have a little walkthrough of that later on. So the timeline for the 2022 to 2023 redistricting plan is at the same time we're doing the governance survey and special election board meetings, we'll also be recovering this redistricting plan and process for the residents. And it's the same schedule as I outlined earlier. And again, as long as council doesn't have any major changes to those timelines, we'll send out those calendar invites. And again, encourage you guys to all come to these meetings as much as you can make time for them. Our mapping drive, which I'll get into in a little bit, will go live early in 2022 and will be active throughout the entire process, all the way up until May of 2023, which is our deadline for sending our ward boundary maps to the county for implementation for the 2023 regular municipal election. The city clerk's office has been working with representable.org to revise and make specific to our community the portal and the mapping tool to incorporate the city's municipal boundaries, ward boundaries, and neighborhood boundaries. These communities of interest, once a resident submits those, can be shared on social media, and then staff can access those maps that the community can submit for use in our analysis whenever we redraw our ward boundaries. Staff will take both of those community of interest submissions, census data, and other constitutional and legal requirements for redistricting and voting districts, and draft preliminary maps for council and public input. My aim is November of 2022. We'll gather additional feedback and revise the maps based on council comments and the community's input on those initial maps. And then we'll hopefully present those maps, the final maps, to be adopted by council on first reading by ordinance in January of 2023, and have the second reading complete by February of 2023. If for some reason our timeline gets off track from this, our drop-dead deadline to have our ward boundaries redrawn and sent to the county is no later than 180 days before the election, which is sometime in the first week of May of 2023. And that's per the charter. So like I mentioned, the mapping drives will use representable.org. It has native English and Spanish support on the website. It has information on redistricting, asks residents to define what makes their communities theirs. It asks them to draw maps of their communities, and then they can share, download, and view other maps of the community. We'll be having our mapping drive link on the city's website, social media pages, and the connected newsletter. And the city clerk's office, Jordan and I, Deputy City Clerk Jordan and I, will be reaching out to other city organizations like the Chamber, Cultivando, LET, our boards and commissions, and any other community groups or meetings that you all attend or go to and think that we would have a, or you would like us to come present at those groups on both the special election and this redistricting plan. Please let us know. We're happy to make time as much as possible to get as much community input as possible on this process. So we also need you all as council members to help us spread the word throughout this process. And then these community maps, again, like I mentioned, will help us determine our communities of interest and help us redraw our ward boundaries. So a little bit of a walkthrough on the representable.org portal. It has a nice little splash page, and residents will click the Getting Started button there. They'll enter their information. They'll tell us what their community, what unites their community. So there's some example sections there. They have to fill out at least one. They don't have to fill out all of them, but we need at least information on one of them. So for example, I made this one for the Civic Center area. So the community activities and services, I said that we're located around the Commerce City Civic Center with South Adams County Fire Protection District and Dick's Sporting Goods Park being nearby. Our community of interest hosts sporting events, concerts, and it's a hub for people seeking government services like passport applications and building permits. In the cultural and historical interests, I put our community is in the more historic area of the city, which has a large portion of Hispanic and Latin monolingual populations. We also have local businesses, restaurants, and markets in our community. So once I've filled out a couple of these, it'll let me proceed to the next page, and it'll ask me to name the community. So I titled this again, Commerce City Civic Center. And then there's also a section where I can add topics of what's relevant to the community. So they've got some popular topics there that you can select. And then if you click that plus button, it opens up a scroll bar of hundreds and hundreds of options for people to define what makes their community theirs with little hashtags there. So once you've defined and named your community, the portal will ask you to enter your address. And then from there, it'll take you, and these blue highlighted portions, residents can click. It's mobile friendly, you can do it on a desktop, iPad, or cell phone. You click the census blocks and select where your community of interest is, and the blue highlights section is that community of interest. So once they've selected their community of interest and kind of drawn their boundaries of where their community's at based on the attributes that they described earlier, they'll save it, and it'll ask them to agree to some terms and conditions. And then it'll take them to their final page where they can download it, they can save it, they can view other communities of interest in the area, and then they can look at other data layers based on their community of interest map to see congressional districts. We've worked with Representative, we'll have our ward boundaries featured and the Commerce City neighborhoods boundaries featured. They can look at previous election data and demographic data within their community of interest area as well. And then on the back-end portal, GIS and the city clerk's office has access to every map that's submitted, and we use those. And the darker the shade of blue there for each map, whenever we overlay it with the city's actual GIS file, the more submissions in that area, the darker it gets on the map, which tells us, okay, a lot of people are submitting this community or this geographic area as their community of interest. That's something for us to consider keeping whole whenever we redraw our district boundary maps. And from there, right, we'll take all these community of interest maps, we'll take the census data and other legal standards and have those preliminary maps to you all by the end of 2022, with the final maps adopted by City Council sometime in Q1 or Q2 of 2023 for implementation for the 2023 and beyond election until we redistrict again. So I will open it up to any questions or discussion from members of council. Thank you all for your time.
Are there any questions from the council? Councilwoman Noble.
Thank you very much, Dylan. That was very impressive. You've done a tremendous amount of work on this, and it's very much appreciated. There are a couple of things that came to mind for me. One of them is, we had less than a 30% turnout for our election, I believe the last election. And I am thinking about people who may not be familiar with municipal government and then asking them to participate in this. And I think one of the things we talked about regarding a survey was being able to explain to people in the survey the details, if you will. So even when you say no change, are you going to explain to people what we currently have in the survey?
Yes, Councilmember Noble, that's correct. So the questions that we sent to the Corona Insights for the survey design, each of those options has a very layman's term description of how that composition would look. And the no changes, right? We still have a mayor. We have 4 members elected from a ward, 4 members elected at large, and no charter change would be needed. So we took that that desire and feedback from council to make sure that no matter if somebody watches these city council meetings every night, or if this is the first time that they're participating in a government survey, they know which option means what for them if council were to consider it, and what that change would be on the council composition. So we want to make sure that nobody is confused or selects any of the wrong option when filling out that survey.
Then another question is, how much has been budgeted for this process, and was there a budget for each of them, or the whole redistricting and potential changes to the makeup of the city council?
Sure, yes. Thank you, Councilmember Noble. So the 2022 special election was budgeted for, as well as the survey. I believe the budget we provided was around $84,000 to $85,000, and as we're working through the contract, it's coming in somewhat below that as we're working through the final contract with the vendor. So we are either hitting or under budget for the survey, and then the special election has been budgeted for as well using the 2017, 2019, and 2021 budget, previous election budgets as an estimate.
Okay, and I was talking with other people about this and about the communities of interest and wondered about the possibility of holding these meetings at schools instead of the recreation centers, because the schools do represent communities of interest. Basically, they are in the center of, say, a half-mile radius.
Thank you, Councilmember Noble. Certainly. So we've already got these January and February meetings set up and the layouts and everything reserved at the recreation centers. And we're happy to add more meetings to these schools. So instead of replacing the ward-specific meetings at the recreation centers, I think Jordan and I could definitely accommodate more ward meetings at these school districts and increase the number of meetings that we're doing rather than replacing, if that sounds acceptable to council.
Sure, then I think the principals would be very happy to help with that. It would be educational for their kids as well. And will people be allowed to attend any ward meeting they choose?
Yeah, we're not going to be checking voter registration at the door. So if you can't make Ward 1 and want to come to Ward 2, for example, both are at Eagle Point, or if you want to come to all four as a resident, we would encourage our primary goal is to make sure that our redistricting maps meet constitutional and legal standards and requirements. Our second goal is that we have as much community feedback as possible. So the majority of my focus and my office's focus for 2022 and into 2023 is going to be going to as many meetings, community events, locations as possible or as we're referred to make sure that we don't leave anybody out or have anybody that's unfamiliar with what we're doing, why we're doing, and they miss an opportunity to engage with this process.
And then final question, Dylan, is there a process for people to participate in the mapping who either don't have access to a computer or don't understand that system?
So we're using the online portal because it's the easiest way for people to draw. I'm sure we can think of something creative or reach out to these members to have them reach out to my office and we can sit down with them and make sure that we can walk them through that process for them. It's just, I'm not sure of a way that we would have an offline mapping tool for them to use that we would be able to then import into a GIS file for overlay and mapping when looking at all the submissions. But we can get creative and talk more and probably come up with an offline solution as we survey other communities and how they're doing their redistricting process. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hurst.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a really good point, Councilwoman Noble. The schools are a really good place to start, and I think they might be able to help us solve the technology issue as well, possibly. I think it's important, and maybe this goes without needing to be said, but that it's educational. I think when we were talking about this several months back, I think we all had the mindset of we want to make sure that the South doesn't get forgotten as the North grows incredibly fast and it becomes, the population maybe 2 to 3 times as big once we grow out, and so you don't want the South to get forgotten. But we were leading down a path towards, looking at a change so we could have at ward have an area that they have to live in. They're at large, but they live in a ward. And really, that led us down a path where less representation is possible for the South. And so trying to make, not showing the changes that we have to make constitutionally would be a disservice, right? We have to have that balance by constitutional law. And so if, I think the last presentation we looked at, there was 14,000 voters opposed to 6,000. That's voters. That's not necessarily how we're looking at it any longer. But to get to that balance, we'll first have to make some pretty significant changes in the boundaries, and then we'll go after these additional goals. I think that educational piece, if we don't get in front of that, will make us look like we're trying to impact those wards, in a way that maybe not be favorable to some people, when in fact we're really just doing that by the data and how we have to do it. And so I think educating on the things that we must do first is going to be key for people's understanding on how to give us good feedback on what's beyond that.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Hurst. And if I can just touch on that, right? We don't want to go out to the community and say, hey, the maps are up, go fill one out, and people don't understand why, what it's going to impact, or how to do it. So the purpose of these ward meetings and then adding on to these school district or meetings at the school facilities is to provide some sort of combination of this presentation and the other ones that we gave earlier this year that provide kind of those broad overarching concepts and goals of redistricting and the charter changes, along with this one that has more detail of how to fill out the representable site, why it's important, stuff like that. So the presentation that you've received tonight and the ones that were included in your packet and that were given to the previous council and earlier this year will be the same information, the same overview that these ward meetings, our goal is to provide at these ward and the school district meetings. So again, if we end up at a place where residents don't know why we're doing what we're doing, why it's important, or we're unaware of it, then my office didn't do a good job at this process. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Douglas.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem. I guess you'd be mayor tonight, right? Thank you so much. And Dylan, I would really like to thank you for all the work that you've put into this. I do have a question on the survey. Are the decisions going to be based solely on the response from the surveys? And what happens if you get an overwhelming response to the surveys from an area that's used to participating and you don't hear from places where people aren't accustomed to participating?
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Douglas, for your question. So the first part of that, and I just want to make sure I'm clear, whenever we have the results of the survey in our hands and have the vendor come in, because they're the data specialists. I'm not a data analyst by any means. So they'll come in and explain what the results were, how they were weighted, and then give you more information. So the council will ultimately be the ones that make the decision of, do you want to put a question before voters in 2022? And if so, which question do you want to put, or which option do you want to put forward as a question to voters in 2022? And if that option passes, then that amends the charter and becomes the new council composition. So the purpose of the survey is to provide you all with some information of what kind of the desires of the community preliminarily before you go out and actually put that question before the voter. And I think I mentioned earlier in the presentation, but right, those that respond to the survey may not be, those that are likely to vote, or vice versa, right? So I also talked about when we were having the conversation with the Corona Insights, the vendor for the surveys, as oversampling those populations that typically don't respond to surveys or have trouble filling them out. And then every survey that gets mailed out of the sample size and on the push to web mail card that everybody in the community participates in will be in both English and Spanish. So we don't have to worry about which household is primarily monolingual for Spanish or primarily monolingual for English. It's going to go out in both languages to every household that way. So hopefully that reduces any sort of respondents falling through the cracks if they get something that they don't understand the language of what's being mailed to them. Can you remind me of your second question again? I'm sorry.
Well, basically, it was just how do we balance this? How do we know who's responding, and if they're responding because they're used to participating? And how do we get those who are not used to participating to participate? Is there going to be something that goes out ahead of the survey so they don't just get this survey in the mail and they have no idea what it is and they toss it? I haven't seen surveys be real successful here in Commerce City in the past myself.
Sure. Sure, thank you, Councilmember Douglas. So that kind of gets into the purpose of these board-specific meetings, right? We don't want anybody to get something in their mailbox and it's a survey and they throw it in the trash. They don't want to take the time to fill it out. We want to explain at these board-specific meetings, and as we go out into the community and to different organization meetings, explain why they're getting the survey, why it's important, and why they should fill it out, and what that will help council do to make their decision sometime in mid to late 2022 for you all. So we want to make sure that nobody gets that survey and then doesn't understand why it's being mailed to them, and then either doesn't fill it out, tosses it, or is confused, right? So that's why we want to make this big push at the beginning of 2022 to really make sure we're going as many places as possible and meeting with as many organizations as possible and getting the word out there. For example, in the Connected newsletter, right? Big blurbs about, you can expect to receive the survey in the mail. Here's why it's important, here's what it means, and here's what it's going to do for the future of Commerce City. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I'd also like to make one other comment. A lot of our residents are lower income, and they work a lot. And that means that they aren't available to attend events and engage like the person who has the luxury of more free time with a higher income. And so how do we get to those people who, it's not a matter of not wanting to participate, but they really can't because they don't have, like I said, the luxury of free time.
Certainly, yeah, and that's important to us too, right? We don't want somebody's personal or financial or employment circumstances to prevent them from knowing what the survey is, filling it out. Same with the redistricting, the mapping drives and the importance of those. So the city's website will have an entire special election or redistricting plan, and then we'll pick or record those ward and those meetings that we have at the various school districts in early 2022, and also upload one of those good recordings as well. So even if somebody can't attend one of those meetings, they get that same ward information that was provided at the meeting, that they can watch it, when it's convenient for them and when they can take time out of their day to get caught up on that information and learn more about it. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Councilmember Noble.
I wanted to underscore Councilmember Hurst's comment about why we were suggesting potential changes in districting or the layout, if you will, of the city council. It wasn't just for the heck of it, but specifically to ensure that residents in the South had a voice in government, since so much of the population is coming into the North. So I hope, is that made clear in the survey? Is that made clear why we're doing it?
Within the survey itself, it won't. So the survey itself is actually just going to ask the questions and provide the explanation of each of the changes. The ward meetings, the information on the website, and the information that goes out in Connected, that more explains the why and the what. The survey itself is gathering that information. I'm sure we could work with Corona and having either a disclaimer or kind of an information page that's included with the survey as we kind of finalize and wrap up the content of that survey. But the initial plan wasn't to include that information, but we're happy to work that in if there's a strong desire of council to do so.
Is this going to be in Commerce City Connections or Connected before you start having the meetings?
We're planning on starting the meetings in January and February of 2022. And then Connected will coincide with that. So January, February, March, every monthly issue of Connected will have this information in it about the survey and the redistricting.
Okay, so the newspaper comes out the same weekend as the first ward meeting. And I think that perhaps postponing the first ward meeting a month so that people could read an actual article about what the intention is of the city council here would be very helpful. Also, regarding Councilmember Douglas's comment, will the survey have a breakdown for us as to the geographic location of the respondents, age, ethnicity, that sort of stuff?
Yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Noble. The survey vendor will have all of that information once we have the results, and we'll report back to council on the conclusion of the survey and the metrics of that survey. So they'll have both that, as I mentioned, that sample size of those that actually got the direct mailed survey in English and Spanish, and then they'll also break it out to the community-wide, that every household gets that push to web that offers that larger engagement as well, and breaking those two surveys statistically out for you all to consider.
Thank you. Do the other council members feel that there should be an article in the paper first to let people know that this is coming the following month?
Councilmember Douglas?
I absolutely agree with that. I think it's good to prepare people so that they know what's coming up. And that was one of the reasons that I made my comment that people have to be aware or they're not going to recognize what they're receiving.
Councilmember Hurst?
I do worry about something this significant not having enough time to digest. But the one thing that I was thinking is that you did say it's going to be open for 2 months, but that's just from a survey perspective. We need to make sure that, we're given time for response. So if you plan on having one on January 5th, then we should propose it if we're not going to have another opportunity for that same ward. But if it's Ward 1, January 5th, and then you come back March 5th, I'm just throwing a date out, and you're going to do it again, more acceptable, right? But if it's just one-time thing, here's your shot, we didn't give you enough prep time, it'll be just like always. We're going to be, scrounging for participation when we're trying to close out the survey itself. So, more front-end communication, so with the intention of getting better participation early, and however we can do that, I'm not opposed. I just think it's very important.
And it would be a way of explaining actually what the city is up to with it. Give a big picture.
Certainly, thank you, council members. Just thinking on the fly, one thing that we could change with that is that we wouldn't designate these as ward-specific meetings. Rather than 4 opportunities for anybody to attend, there would be 2 at the Eagle Point, 2 up at Bison Ridge, and then more as we add the school district locations as well. So instead of making it, here's Ward 1's, it's on January 5th, you got 2 weeks. Actually, you have 3 other opportunities plus whatever we can fit in and add over the next few months as well. So instead of titling these ward-specific meetings, we can just title them, special election or redistricting town halls, and leave the ward specificity out of it, if that might be more amenable to council.
Councilmember Ford?
Yeah, Dylan, for me, I would agree. The more advance notice we can give our residents, the better. However, my only concern is based on your timing for these meetings, if you were to shove one back a month, where does that put us in the end result that you're trying to achieve without pressing the time limit on the 2023 piece that you're trying to get to?
Sure, thank you, Councilmember Ford. So we're, as we're talking with the vendor, we're not planning on actually mailing out the survey until sometime in mid to late March. And then from there, it'd be open for 1 to 2 months. So the January and February meetings are already a month typically ahead of when the survey would be mailed out, and we can fit in more meetings there, throughout January and February as well. And then, they would get that survey in the mailbox ideally sometime between mid to late March. So they've had that opportunity. The information's been out there. It's been in 2 to 3 connecteds by that time as well for them to get that information.
Thank you, Dylan, for the presentation tonight. I had a few questions also. In the presentation, you had mentioned that staff met with pollsters for budget proposal. I was just curious, who were the pollsters and from what wards?
So the pollsters were companies that we were able to find within Colorado. So we had NRC, or also known as Polco, and then we had Corona Insights that we met with. NRC Polco really wanted us to use this online subscription as service, do-it-yourself type of polling application, and Corona actually quoted us for them conducting the survey, designing it, processing and analyzing that data, and coming back to council with that feedback. So that's why we went with Corona, because they were actually proposing to do more of that mailed survey and gathering that information, analyzing the data, and being able to present that information to council rather than staff gets access to an online portal. And we don't, there's not a lot of data analysts on city staff to help us do those surveys. So that's why we opted to go with Corona over NRC Polco.
Okay. And do we know what type of questions they asked, or what they may ask, or do we know any questions that they asked?
Yeah, so those questions would be the ones that I went over early in the presentation. So the various options for council composition, the concept of the mayor or the council president, and then it'll ask them some other questions like, do you know what ward you live in? Do you know your council member? Have you ever attended a city council meeting? Have you ever, served on a board or commission? Just to kind of gauge in that survey their historical public engagement or political knowledge at the municipal level for the survey.
Okay, thanks. Then a couple more questions. Does the charter have to change since you can only run for mayor at large in your ward? So is there a plan to change the charter that potentially may come up as well?
So any changes to the council composition, the role of the mayor, the number of wards, and the ward maps, it's provided in the charter that the ward maps have to be sent 180 days to the county clerk before the election, but the actual council composition and the role of the mayor and the number of wards, those would all require a charter change. So that's why we're doing the survey for the public to give their feedback of what they may want to see out of the council composition change, and at that time, when council gets the results, you all would make that decision of which option you want to put forward to the voters. And again, if that ballot question passes for a charter amendment, it would be codified and then in effect for 2023. If it doesn't pass, then, or you guys, the council proposes no ballot question for the 2022 special election, then there wouldn't be a charter amendment at that point. But any changes to the composition or the role of the mayor or the number of wards would require a charter amendment. So that's the need for the special election.
Okay, thank you. And then last question, would it make sense to redistrict first before deciding on any choices with different types of wards or at-large seats?
So that's certainly an option, but based on the discussion at the February and April 2021 presentations, council, as I discussed in the presentation, the previous council wanted to get the comments were they didn't want to wait for 2023 to conduct the charter amendment election because they didn't want to be conducted or in effect until 2025. And the previous council at that time, there were comments made of that's too far out for an actual implementation. The 2021 turnaround time with the informal staff survey with very limited community impact for 2021 was too quick a turnaround time because it limited community input opportunities. Mm-hmm. So that's why we've drafted the 2022 special election to kind of meet that middle ground of having sufficient citizen input and also allowing the election to happen in November of 2022 for implementation in 2023. So kind of cutting that middle ground there between the two competing priorities that council had at that time. But if council desired to, this new council, current council decided that you all want to put off the charter amendment until after redistricting happens, so it wouldn't be in effect until we would do the survey and potentially the charter amendment in 2023. That's certainly an option for council to do after the ward maps go into effect. But I mean that would be council's decision there, and staff would accommodate that accordingly.
Thank you. Council Member Madera.
So how does the change in the charter affect term limits?
So the charter provides that no member of council can serve more than 2 4-year terms as a council member and then 2 4-year terms as mayor. From reviewing the February and April study sessions, I didn't find comments from council to evaluate in the survey and ask residents for input on term limits. But if council wanted to propose a charter amendment to, amend or eliminate or modify term limits, that's also something that council could propose via a ballot question at an election.
Okay, yeah, I was just kind of curious with the change. And then the other thing is, I agree with the other council members that we really need to get as much communication up in the front end before doing these meetings, because, that January 5th meeting, I think attendance is going to be pretty sparse if we don't get the social media and get it in the paper, and especially in the paper, because that's what most people read. And then, I'd like to see something when we are doing the surveys where we, provide the technology for people that don't have access to it, and have meetings where they can come in and have access to the technology to fill out these maps, and, someone helping them with any technology questions that they may have.
Certainly, yeah, that we would be happy to look into that and see how we can accommodate that. Just right now, right, given the limited staffing inside the Civic Center, right, setting up, queueless appointments or however we need to facilitate that, but we're happy to do that as much as possible for residents.
Thank you.
Councilmember Douglas.
Yes, thank you. I was not here on the last council, and so I was not part of the discussion. But to me, doing the redistricting first would only make sense. It kind of seems like putting the cart before the horse. So I'm in agreement with your thoughts on the redistricting first, Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions?
I guess, Mayor Pro Tem, excuse me, but can I just get an informal feel of council on doing the survey and council composition potential changes for 2022? If, right, the decision was made by previous council and the budget was allocated by the previous council, but it's at the pleasure of this council to change that if you all want to extend this out until 2023, and if there's a strong desire of this council to do so, we need to engage with the vendor, let them know that we're pushing this off a year and rebudgeting for it in 2023 and revising our work plan in my office to accommodate that as well.
Okay. I'll get a majority. Councilmember Madera.
So are we talking about the redistricting of the wards?
My question is postponing the survey and potential council composition charter amendment and special election for 2022. There's been comments made tonight by council members that doing the composition changes in tandem or right before the redistricting of the wards is putting, I think Councilmember Douglas, he said, putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. So if council would like to do the redistricting first, doing the community of interest maps, redrawing the ward boundaries and getting those in effect for 2023, and then doing the council composition changes after the new ward maps are in effect, that's what I'm asking, if you guys would like to postpone that part of the plan.
I think, the prior council, the thought was, depending on what citizens want to do, there might not even be districts.
Correct.
Right? So if we do all this work to create the districts, and then we decide, or the community comes back and they want all at large, then, it'd be kind of unnecessary to do the districting. So that's why we were doing them both in tandem and then putting it out to the community to get their input, because really there's no easy answer of what the best way to have, appropriate representation for the entire city is going to look like. So, we really want to know what the community thinks is going to be best. And so that's why, doing them both in tandem helps us, find out, okay, what does the community want to see, and then helps us draw the maps at the same time.
Councilmember Hurst.
Yeah, I remember that conversation. I think it adds a layer of confusion when we're doing them simultaneously, to where that was I guess the origin of my comment earlier of, we really have to do a good job educating on why we're there and what we're doing, because we're going to redistrict. If we keep wards, we have to redistrict to stay in constitutional compliance. So I almost want to see, from my point of view, I want to see what that looks like, because I need to, kind of what we were hearing is, if we just took population numbers, all of the South might be Ward 1, and then 2, 3, and 4 might be, up the corridor on the north side. I want to see kind of how that changes the layout of this, because then I think we still need to continue to focus within law on how we can keep these, interest areas represented appropriately. And so, to me, it's hard to see the success we all want to see in this when they're competing. It just seems a little convoluted and kind of competitive. But at the same time, I mean, I hear what Councilman Madera is saying. If we go to the community either now or afterwards and they say, the whole thing's a bad idea, let's just do everybody at large, well, that's a lot of money and work kind of thrown out the window. I still think there's a ton of value in understanding the 2020 census data, how that's changed since 2013, even the 2010 census data, understanding kind of not just the population growth, but where the growth is currently happening, where it's going to happen. All of that comes into play in my opinion on how we're going to redistrict. So I really think that for me to make the best, most well-rounded decision would be after understanding that 2020 census data, and it might be the same for the community.
Councilmember Noble.
I'm agreeing with Councilmember Hurst again. I asked for the census data last week, in fact, because I thought it was so important for us to have as we're making these kind of decisions. And education is, bottom line, the most critical aspect of this. And without having an educational component built into it, which is advance notification and information to the public in a, before the survey, before the redistricting, before it all, then I think we're doing the community an injustice. And what we're trying to do is do the right thing. We might have 8 wards as opposed to none. So anything is possible, of course, but until we have a better understanding, at the same time, I'm afraid it's got to all sort of happen at the same time, at the same pace. But to start these ward meetings in January is far too early without an education and without a clear understanding of all of the components and our intentions in doing it in the first place. The community really needs to understand that and to know that.
Councilmember Grimes, do you have an opinion or?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah, I'm in agreement with Councilmember Noble and Hurst. I also understand your comment, Councilmember Douglas, about getting the cart before the horse, but to Councilmember Madera's point, why do the work on redistricting if we end up with no districts? So I tend to lean towards Councilmember Noble and Hurst in terms of running simultaneously, but giving certainly more time for notification for the educational piece. We're just too close to January 5th to spring that on people. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis, would you like to say anything?
I've got to say that I'm in agreement with all the other council. The 6th or the 5th of January is 3 weeks away. there's no way that we can effectively, to Councilor Noble's notes and to the others, yourself included, it's just not enough time to pass that on. So.
Thank you. Dylan, does that help at all, the questions, the answers?
Yes, so if I'm understanding, council's still in agreement to continue as is, probably postpone the January 5th meeting and fit in another town hall sometime in January, February to allow more notification, and then reach out to the school districts to discuss using their facilities as well throughout January, February, and March of early 2022 for additional special election and redistricting information sessions.
Yeah, that sounds good. And then also, I agree too, the January timeframe is way too fast. So if you could, I agree if you can push that back. Councilmember Madera.
Yeah, and I would just add, in addition to using the school district facilities to also use their communication channels to get the word out, because they have a lot closer connection to the residents through the students and their parents, that if we really want to have outreach and connect with people, try to get something in their communication, or they use the flyer app in Adams 14. So if they'll allow us to send the message out, because this does affect the school district as well.
Certainly, yeah, whatever we can commandeer for their communication piece to get the information out, we'll definitely try and wiggle in there with them. Thank you.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Dylan, I think that you may have just said this is how you're going to do it, but just to confirm, these will not be ward specific. They'll be just all residents, all welcome at all meetings.
Correct, yeah.
Correct?
And instead of doing ward-specific meetings, we'll just have, at least for at the recreation center, information sessions on special election and redistricting plan, and then additional whatever we can fit in at the school facility locations as well.
Perfect. And then this is, certainly not directly related to what your efforts are right now, but is there a possibility of some sort of voter registration campaign alongside this effort? You're going to have people who are interested in this in the same room at the same time, and I'd really love to see us pump up voter registration and make an effort to educate people about how to become registered to vote.
Yeah, Councilmember Grimes, that's a great idea. I can certainly reach out to the Adams County Elections Division, and then also incorporate information into the slide information whenever we present about the importance of not just filling the survey out, but also registering to vote and being a voter at the election. It's a funny idea to think somebody will fill the survey out and feel strongly one way or another, but then not be a registered voter, and then be able to then vote for or against that change. So yeah, definitely. Encouraging and providing that information of how to register.
Absolutely. Well, and I had that same thought as I was saying it. It seems strange that someone would be engaged enough to participate but not also be registered, but I can see that as a possibility. But then also, maybe they tell their friends or neighbors or multi-generational homes, maybe they take that home to somebody else, and just kind of proliferate that through the community.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Councilmember Noble.
Dylan, I didn't hear you mention how the education piece is going to get out to the community. I'm talking about in advance of the meetings.
Sure, yeah, so thank you, Councilmember Noble. The thing that we're going to work with communications on is social media posts and connected on the website as much as we can reach using our communication tools. And then as Councilmember Madera had mentioned, reaching out to the school districts as well when we're trying to find times and dates for hosting the information sessions there. Also having the conversation about using their communication platform as well here in the next few days.
Yep, exactly, because the deadline is the 15th, I think, for the end of January.
Yeah,
issue.
for our connected, the dates that I've provided communications for publishing are are in there and ready to go. They were just marked tentative because I didn't want to commit to something without council's feedback, obviously. And then getting that feedback and then making those adjustments as needed.
Except Dylan, I'm not referring to the dates. I'm referring to an educational explanation about what we're doing, like an article.
Right, yeah. So that information will be provided and connected as well.
Okay, great. And I am totally supportive and have been over the last year or more about engaging the schools more. And as I've talked to principals, they are more than happy to put it in their weekly newsletters.
Fantastic. Thank you, Councilmember Noble.
And I would just like to add too, if possible, Dylan, can you explore if there's a possibility in the budget to maybe do like a little postcard mailer? Because sometimes I'm notified by my constituents the mailman may miss their mailbox and they don't get the newspaper, but just like another second type of mail system, if it's in the budget, can you look into that as well?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas. I'll have to look to see what we have for mailage and postings and mailer design for that. But if that's something that we need to fit into our communication piece, then that's something that we'll do.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other council members with questions? Okay, thank you, Dylan.
Thank you, Council.
Next presentation is the Comprehensive Plan Existing Conditions Report. I would like to invite Steve Timms, Planning Manager, to make the presentation.
Good evening, Council. Pleasure to be here with y'all tonight. Since I won't see you probably before holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to y'all. Tonight, we are going to talk about the update on the comprehensive plan. In particular, we're going to look at the existing conditions report. And tonight's outline will be a little bit of background on the comprehensive plan overall. Then we'll talk about the conditions, the existing conditions report, and then talk about next steps. For the next probably 90 to 120 days will be some critical steps for the comprehensive plan. So the purpose of the study session tonight is to present highlights from the existing conditions report, focusing on the demographic data and issues for the comprehensive plan to include. And so we'll look to see from council if you feel like the list is complete or if there's some additional items on the issues that need to be looked at. So in terms of the comprehensive plan, it is part of what's known as long-range or strategic planning, and that involves kind of several steps. Where are we now? So understanding the current situation and community dynamics. That's where this current comp plan, issues identification, the current conditions report comes into play. Where do we want to be as a community? That's accomplished through an updated vision for the community, and that'll be one of the next steps coming up in January, February that we'll be looking at and exploring with you all. And then how do we get there for the community? That's the updated comprehensive plan. So it does solve and look at some of these long-range planning efforts. More specifically, the comprehensive plan, it is a vision of what the community wants to be, a long-range 20 to 30-year time horizon. It is comprehensive in scope, so it encompasses land use, also does transportation and parks and economic development, things like that. And then it's a policy document, so it's not code, it's not law, but it is a policy document that does guide future regulations. And then it helps to inform, of course, land use, areas for reinvestment, employment, et cetera. So as part of the project team, there's the main consultant, Hauser Levine, and then there's some sub-consultants as well that are working on the project, various aspects of it. The project scope is multifaceted, but this slide identifies some of the main attributes, if you will, of the project that has occurred up till now, and then in the future as well. And then the progress to date. So there are about 9 steps for this process overall. we're done with about 4 of the steps. And so step 4, 5, actually the next ones coming up are pretty big and pretty meaty. But tonight we're talking about existing, or steps 3 and 4. So let's focus a moment on the existing conditions report, a compilation of data to help inform the plan. Originally, it goes back to my slide about where we are at today. So it does provide an overview of some current issues and opportunities and challenges, assets that are in Commerce City. It is not an approved document. It's not an adopted document. It'll be part of the appendices of the overall comp plan, so it will be there and live there. And it does help inform the comprehensive plan, obviously. So in terms of the existing conditions report, there's some various sections. These 6 here talk about past plans, studies, and initiatives, demographic profile, market analysis, existing land use, current zoning, transportation, and mobility. As it relates to the past plans and studies, so this new comprehensive plan that the city's going through, it will build upon the city's past approved plans. So there was a whole list, several pages full of plans that the city has worked on over the past several decades. And those help to inform and provide insight and information that will be fed into this new comp plan going forward for the community. And these are just a couple of examples of some plans. Now, within the existing conditions report proper, there's a whole section on demographic data. And this actually feeds in nicely with just the previous conversation that y'all were talking about redistricting and population growth. This is one of the demographic sections full of various maps and charts and graphs that you see here. But this one talks about population. And obviously, back in 2019, just over 60,000 residents. We got the latest numbers that have us about 64,000, over 64,000 citizens now. Back in 2008, 42,000. When I started with the city, we were about 21,000. So the city continues to grow. And you see there in the bottom map, the color-coded areas. While all of the city grows, the majority of growth is occurring north and east, and will continue to grow that way over the next couple of decades. Some demographic facts at a glance. So I looked at the previous comp plan and then compared to the existing, or the existing conditions report for this one, and just so you have a little comparison of some data then and some data today. So educational attainment back in the last comp plan was increasing. Today we know that nearly 60% of their citizens and residents have at least a high school or associate's degree within the city. The Hispanic ethnicity population, last comp plan, just under 53%, now just over 49%. The average household size, 3.1, just at 3 now. I will say back in 2010, when we did the last one, that 3.1 was the largest household size in the metro area. And so that's interesting. We've gotten a little bit smaller, although not much, but that's certainly good to know. The average age was certainly young last time. We're 32. One of the youngest communities, even, I looked at Thornton and Aurora and Brighton. All of those are about 33, 34. So we actually have a huge young population for the metro area that's moving here. Our household income, you can see that has gone up dramatically since 2010. And with that, the highest incomes, those over 100,000, have gone up the most, if you look at that data as well. Job housing ratio, this compares the number of jobs in the community to the number of households. The higher the number tells you that there's more jobs. The lower the number is more of a bedroom community. And last in 2010, the community was like, we don't want to become a bedroom community. We want there to be a balance between jobs and households. And so you see that we've gone down a little bit. We're still pretty high. That's considerably higher than most of the suburbs of the Denver area. You'll see that we have gained some jobs there. We have not gained as many jobs as we have population, but our jobs have gone up. And then our largest employer, it was UPS. It is still UPS, not even close in our community in terms of jobs. Some information on market analysis. This is also obviously from the current conditions report, but as residential, talks about as our population continues to grow and the data talks that Adams County is going to grow at about 8% a year for the next several decades. That's a huge amount of growth. I can't even tell you how high that is, right? And that's for all the communities. Commerce City will absorb a lot of that growth, but obviously Brighton and Thornton, or North Aurora, all of those are going to continue to grow as well. But as our population continues to grow, there will be more demand for a wide variety of housing types. So I know we talked last time about housing from entry level all the way up to executive level housing. That's very important to have in a community. And we have a high proportion of younger residents that we talked about. There may be a significant future demand for first-time homeowners in our city, or for more apartments or townhomes, right, that people can enter into. Back in 2010, we were in the middle of a horrible recession, right? And homes were selling in the core city for $45,000, right? They're not that way anymore. And so now we're at the opposite end, where housing prices are such a big concern in the Front Range, right? We also know that large household size, there may be a demand for premium homes, for move-up homes as well. So that's important to realize. In terms of retail, no surprise to anyone in this room, right? Future demand is very strong. Vacancy rates are low. Market pricing is high. However, Commerce City does have the opportunity to focus on asking where and what type of retail would contribute to the community. And so that'll be important as we go forward. The office market, it's uncertain. With the pandemic has really changed office market. And so the plan, or this conditions report, talks about if the city desires to grow office, more features and amenities for the tenants will be needed. And certain clustering, certain symbiotic businesses are going to thrive in this type of environment. And so that could be something we want to look at for office. And then for industrial, logistics and warehouse remain very high, the demand for that. That's not a surprise as well. And that's not just in Commerce City, that's up and down the Front Range as well. In terms of the growth boundary, we're also looking at that. What are our overall boundaries, our base map, if you will? And so we have a variety of IGAs that represent some of our growth, constraints or limits with Thornton and with Aurora and with Brighton. However, there are some opportunities for looking at those to see what makes sense. And then for annexation areas, and whether those are new areas by the airport, whether it's our infill areas of Monaco and DuPont, right? Those should be reviewed and updated for the new plan as well. So let's take a look at some of the identified issues that are in this report. And basically it breaks it out into a couple of items by topic. The first one are key themes. These are ones that came out of some of the outreach that we heard. And you'll see this list. There's 2 pages here. I'm not going to read these, but these are certainly some of the key themes that have come up with the outreach. I will say, for example, on this page, homelessness. Homelessness is not mentioned in our current plan. That was not even really on the radar. Just as historic preservation wasn't on the radar back in 2010 as well. So there have been some new ideas, there have been some new situations that have come up over the past decade that this plan will take a look at. But here's, this is again what we heard from the community outreaches. And then from that, there's going to be some representative issues. And this is what the consultant has come up with based on hearing from the different stakeholders and a variety of groups. And this is found in the second half, if you will, of the existing conditions report. And these are items that, while not necessarily solved in the comprehensive plan, they'll be at least identified. And part of the purpose of the comp plan is to list those goals and objectives and implementation strategies that will lay out prioritization going forward for the community. So for land use and zoning, again, it's 2 pages here. I will be glad to answer anything about these if anyone has any questions on any of these. We did take this to Planning Commission last week. The items in red are new additions from them that they felt like were not included, and so I have just added that for your edification as well. But we have 2 pages for land use and zoning, and then the existing report goes into transportation. And this is going to be more vehicular transportation, and you'll see some of the issues there. Again, the Planning Commission added truck issues, truck uses, truck roadways as an item to take a look at as well. Then we have active transportation. Active will be more like pedestrian or bicycle or things like that, non-traditional automobile. And so these were some of the issues associated with that have come up. We have community facilities. And these are going to be those type of public or civic uses that are found within the community. What should the comp plan look at? Well, here's a list here. Again, conference and convention facilities, that was not on anyone's radar 12 years ago either as part of 2010. So that's certainly a new one that's come up. Infrastructure and utilities. How do you handle the water? How do you handle the stormwater? How do you handle infrastructure, right? We're going to talk about the road impact fee is going to be your next presentation after this. That plays into very much this. The item in red there was partnership with regional agencies, regional incentives. So sometimes if the city offers incentives, other agencies are still paying the full fee, and so you don't get the maximum bang for your buck there. So there's a lot of coordination that could occur with some of our regional partners on infrastructure as well. Community character is an important issue in our community, has been, still is. And here you see some of the topics. Again, historic properties, historic preservation, education, those were not considered back in 2010. Then we have, finally, we have parks and recreation. And so here's some issues for parks. Planning Commission had then identified golf course maintenance. You know, it's coming on 30 years old. And so talking about that, recreation opportunities for kids. We mentioned earlier that Commerce City has such a young population, a lot of 20 to 35-year-olds. And so what type of recreation opportunities exist for kids? And then open space. People love our open space in our community. How could that potentially be expanded appropriately as needed? So with that, before we talk about next steps in the timeline, I do want to stop and get any feedback from council. Any specific available data missing that you did not see as part of the existing conditions report? And also on these list of identified issues, any particular items that may not be included as well. So we would love to hear from you all, and I'll be glad to go back to any slide as.
Are there any council members with questions? Councilmember Noble.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was really interesting, and actually it underscores a lot of my understanding of what concerns people in Commerce City. So this is really very helpful. I'm wondering about adult recreation activities also. There's been many people talking about seeking things like pickleball and tennis and skateboard parks, et cetera, around Commerce City. So in addition to recreation opportunities for kids, but also for adults, a variety of opportunities, I guess.
Very good, thank you. Yes, we can definitely add that or clarify that.
Yeah, and is this the place? So we did have an emphasis on open space and green space, trees, that sort of stuff somewhere.
The section does talk about the city parks and how they are good overall for the city. There did feel though that not so much for the parks, although we do need more parks in all areas of the city like Irondale and South Rose Hill, but certainly on the, a lot of people like to come to Commerce City. In particular, we heard from Planning Commission on the Northern Range that they like to be able to walk on trails and things like that. That's a popular activity for people of all ages. And so how can that be continued or especially linked together? We have a little segments here and there, but how do you really link those into a whole program?
Yes, and I've been noticing that some applications for developments in North Commerce City do not have parks. So that's sort of a widespread issue. What about when you said transit? Did you mean mass transit?
Yeah. So back on the in the transportation mobility, that was yes, bus transit, first mile, last mile type of opportunities. is the RTD. You know, RTD does pretty well in the south part of the city, not as well as they could in the north part with all the growth. And so I think it was reevaluate and continue to work with RTD on some of their opportunities and also look at new opportunities as well.
Okay, that would be great. And I didn't see anything on here regarding renewable uses, renewable energy uses. And certainly that was an issue 10 years ago when it came to GHG, and I find it kind of shocking that it isn't an issue that cropped up. I've certainly heard it discussed when I've sat in on the focus groups.
Yes, I think, I agree with you. I think it may have been, although I'm not 100% listed here under either environmental health or sustainability or diversifying local industries as well. But yes, I think we can certainly add that or have the consultant add that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councilmember Douglas.
Yes, thank you. I notice on here, under representative issues, lack of commercial, aging commercial. I've also noticed in looking at like the zoning maps and what's there, like one thing that pops up into my mind specifically is the area off 104th and Tower. It was supposed to be mixed use, and now it's filled with the carriage homes. And I wonder how that happened, and what is the definition of mixed use, and is it not specific enough to make sure that there is commercial where it's designated mixed use?
So those are good questions. I know that we are commissioning a consultant specifically to look at that and look at some potential changes, right, in our PUDs and our mixed-use definitions to give greater certainty and predictability for that. What you see, though, built, though, is allowed within the reunion zoning, though, at the end of the day.
I just have to say that it may be allowed, but it might not be the smartest thing to have there.
Councilmember Hurst.
Yeah, I think that's why we need to, when we're talking about properties, we have to understand the history. Because the property we're just talking about could have been on sale for 15 years to be commercial. They kept striking out, so they decided to build residential. Without that understanding of history, it just becomes a circular conversation.
Yes, thanks, Steve, for the presentation tonight. I just had a couple questions. Under healthcare access, can you give me a little more detail what falls under healthcare access? Because Commerce City has an aging population, and has anyone reached out to like any HMOs or anything on what to explore those possibilities? So,
yes, so I think healthcare access here is variety. I think it has to do with social healthcare, meaning that we have a lot of people that can't afford easy access to healthcare, right? And what do you do about that? I think it has to do with the fact that we have a couple of doctor's offices and we have the Salute Clinic, we don't have an outpatient surgical center. We certainly don't have a full-scale hospital, right? And so if there is some type of acute care needed, what does that look like? And then I think it has to do with as you mentioned, and the demographic data talks about it. So even though Commerce City has a very high number of 20 to 35-year-olds moving to the city, our second fastest growing rate is everyone over 65. And so especially people that have lived here a while, right, are retaining to stay here. And that's true all over the U.S., right? As the baby boomers retire, that population cohort is very large. So it also has to do with that as well. I like your idea about reaching out to a couple of the insurance companies and getting some information from them. We'll be sure to add that.
Okay, thank you, because it would be nice to explore that, like possibly even a Kaiser location or something like that. And then I'm not sure where this would fall under, but also the possibility of bike lanes that I'm aware of. There are none in the south area, so I think that's important too, if that could be incorporated for the residents and my constituents' safety.
Yes, ma'am, we can totally add that. That would be under active transportation, so we'll definitely do that.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hurst?
I think what Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas just said is a very key thing for us to take into this. If we feel the need that we need something, commercial, medical access, and we don't have it, I think one of the things we should set out to do is learn what it takes to get that. And what I mean by that is we're going to have a tough time getting a hospital because Aurora just got awarded a new site, and then we have the one in Brighton. So we have to understand what the expectations are for a population density, for the big circles they draw. We're likely in Brighton's hospital circle, and the south side's likely going to be, and any growth that we see up north will likely be in this new Aurora hospital that's on the E470 corridor. So I think when we're looking to gain something for our city, understanding what it's going to take for us to get there is also going to be key for us, because we could say we want a hospital, but with the two competing hospitals now on both sides of us, what do we need from a population standpoint to get that type of access in our community? I think that's always going to be necessary, because we could feel like we have 40,000 people on the north side, and that's really dense. But when you look at it from a regional picture, we don't have anywhere close to what we need to bring in that type of resource or asset to this side, to the community that we see a need in. So I think just gaining a better understanding from a commercial standpoint, we went out and hired a commercial consultant to try to tell us what we need. Same type of thing. If we're missing something that the community really longs for, we have to understand how to get there.
Councilmember Ford?
I agree with Councilman Hurst, and as well as with the Mayor Pro Tem. Growing up in this community, we had a lot of doctors in the southern portion, a lot of family medicine, and I met with Representative Diana DeGette years ago concerning the doctors and medical services that were leaving our community. And she offered not much help, because those medical facilities were going out of business because a lot of the services that were rendered were never paid for. And so I think a lot of that has to do with income levels and education, and with some of the new providers out there, maybe there's someone out there that we can get into our community that would be able to effectively help with medical, especially on the southern end. There's not a lot of options.
Thank you, Steve. I believe that's all the questions. You can continue.
So let me then conclude with the next steps and timelines. So as I referenced early in the presentation, the next 90 to 120 days will be some critical next steps for the comp plan. So what's going to come next in January and February is going to be the vision statement of what the community desires to be. And we're going to have a study session with you all with that. After that, there's going to be a study session with goals and objectives of the plan that build off of these particular issues that have been identified by the community. We're going to look at the city base map on what those boundaries are, and then what the future land use map and community character are. And so, what should go where and what makes sense, right? And so that's going to be that'll go back to your question about the mixed use, right? What that means, or where should the commercial areas be and things like that. So that's going to be extremely important. And then some special studies areas, some areas of change, predominantly in the southern part of the city, and then citywide plans and policies leading up to adoption. So those will be some, I guess, what to look forward to here over the next 90 to 120 days, and then even beyond, going to late spring and summer. And with all of this as well, there's going to be a variety of outreach, community outreach associated with the different steps, et cetera. This particular existing conditions report, it is on the city's website or the comprehensive plan website, so anyone has access to it as well. And with that, that concludes my formal presentation. I'll be glad to answer any specific questions or any additional questions.
Okay, is there any other, sorry. Do any other council members have questions? Thank you, Steve.
Thank you all so much.
Our next presentation is drainage impact fee and road impact fee updates. I would like to invite Brent Sordelin, city engineer, to introduce the presentation.
Yes, good evening, Honorable Mayor Pro Tem and members of City Council. Today I will be presenting on the drainage impact fee and the road impact fees. And since we have some new council members, I'll be covering some of the material that I shared in previous study sessions throughout last year, or this year, excuse me. I'm going to start with the drainage impact fee, and I will start sharing my screen here. Dylan, it looks like you need to give me permission to share my screen.
Brent, can you try it now?
Yep.
All right, we can see it now. Thank you, Brent.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan. So like I said, I was going to start with the drainage impact fee, and helping me tonight with that is Jesse Noble with Respect Engineering. And Jesse's firm helped to put together the drainage impact fee study. Later, Jennifer Carpenter will be helping me with the road impact fee. So this evening, I'll be covering the purpose and need, a review of the drainage, or overview of the drainage impact fee, drainage impact fee options, and then we'll go to discussion. The purpose and need, the city is developing rapidly, and our drainage impact fees have not been updated since the mid-2000s. The last one to be updated was Third Creek, and that was updated in 2007. And as you can see, Second Creek hasn't been updated since 2003. The drainage impact fees are based upon older and now outdated costs from previous master plans. So the city needs to update our drainage impact fees to help fund capital projects to accommodate the increased stormwater from all of our new development. This slide just shows the current impact fees that we have. So we have direct flow area 53. And that drainage basin currently has a fee of around $3,000 per acre. We have Second Creek, which has a drainage impact fee of around $1,700 per acre. We have the Buffalo Run Trib, which has a drainage impact fee of around $2,100. And that's really the drainage fee, or the drainage trib that goes through the golf course. And then we have Third Creek, which has a drainage impact fee of around $1,400 per acre. I'm going to start off going over Henderson Creek. So Henderson Creek, we need to install a regional pond. We call it the Triangle property, which is just south of I-76. We also need a crossing underneath 76. Then we need to convert a couple of regional ponds in River Oaks and River Run. And then we also need a crossing under US 85, and we need channels all the way out to the South Platte. So we're proposing a new fee of around $25,000 per acre for Henderson Creek. And so this is direct flow area 53. And you'll see later in the presentation that I'm going to combine Henderson Creek and direct flow area 53. Henderson Creek is actually a part of direct flow area 53. The reason for combining these is that there's really not a lot of developable area left in direct flow area 53. So if we were to have a fee for just direct flow area 53, it would be around $50,000 per acre. The next drainage basin is Irondale. We're currently in the process of trying to purchase properties for regional detention ponds. The current master plan calls for a 60-inch reinforced concrete pipe, basically from Highway 2 all the way out to the South Platte. That pipe does not currently exist. So the fee for Irondale Gulch that we're proposing is around $55,000 per acre. The next drainage basin is First Creek. We need to construct a large regional pond called the Mall Reservoir, which is just north of the Arsenal in 96th Avenue. We also need a crossing underneath the O'Brien Canal, underneath Havana, underneath I-76, underneath 104th, and underneath US 85. And then upgraded crossing at Brighton Road, and then channel improvements out to the South Platte. And so the cost for this basin is right around $63,000 per acre. The next basin is Second Creek. We need to build 2 regional ponds along Second Creek. We need to build a crossing underneath the O'Brien Canal. We need to build channel improvements north of the O'Brien Canal. We also have several channel improvements along Second Creek. And we're proposing a fee of around $36,000 per acre for Second Creek. The last one is Third Creek. This is our most undeveloped basin, and there are no regional ponds associated with Third Creek, just a lot of crossing improvements. So we need crossing at Himalaya, Tower, looks like Buckley Road, and then we need some channel improvements out underneath 76. And so the cost for Third Creek is right around $14,000 per acre. So as an overview, we've collected about $1,700 million worth of impact fees total. We have a capital need of right around $326 million of drainage improvements. So that leaves us with a shortfall of around $324 million. And so this slide is just basically an overview of the proposed impact fees. And you can see that there's a large jump for every basin, and that First Creek and Irondale, we do not have existing impact fees for those basins. So next, I'm going to go over some drainage impact fee options for possible adoption by City Council. Option 1 is to adopt the full drainage impact fee as proposed. Option 2 would be to phase the drainage impact fee over time. And then option 3 would be to adopt a portion of the proposed drainage impact fee. And with this option, we would have to make up that funding gap with some kind of stormwater utility fee or possibly a tax. One thing to note is that our fees do not include any future operating and maintenance costs, which we estimate would be approximately $1 million per year. The other thing is that staff, excuse me, would suggest that any future ordinance would have some kind of escalator that would be tied to the construction cost index so that we could adjust the fees every year beginning in 2024. The other thing to note is that the Northern Infrastructure General Improvement District and the E470 Residential Area General Improvement Districts do not have any regional drainage projects included in their districts. So this slide basically shows if we went with full adoption of the fees, And this just shows what would be paid per single family lots in each of the different basins. And this is based off of a 7,000 square foot lot with 60% of the lot being impervious. And this is one possible option for phasing over time. We could propose to increase the fee 5% in January, 35% in July, and then another 35% in October. And then we would get to the full impact fee in January of 2023. The other option is to phase the fee in as a part of the development process. So we could collect 25% of the drainage impact fee at building permit, 50% at certificate of occupancy, and then 25% a year after the certificate of occupancy. The 25% could be secured with a letter of credit, or possibly the developers could bond for that. And so the last option is basically we would adopt 75% of the total capital costs as a drainage impact fee, and then the other 25% would have to be covered with some kind of stormwater utility fee or tax. And so in this particular slide, I just listed a cost we could have per individual family lot, and that is spaced out over a 50-year time frame. And this is the same option with us basically adopting 80% of the capital costs as a drainage impact fee, and then having a stormwater utility fee that covers the other 20%. As you can see, as we go through these options, the utility fee goes down a little bit. The more we require the developers to cover. And so this is just an example. If we did 85% capital costs covered by the impact fee, and then 15% covered by some type of stormwater utility fee. And then the last option is basically a 90% capital cost with a 10% stormwater utility fee. And excuse me, and I guess the next slide is to take any questions from City Council.
Are there any council members with any questions? Councilmember Noble?
Could you explain again why this increase is necessary? And also how we compare to other cities?
Sure. So I'm going to stop sharing here. So thanks for the question, Councilwoman Noble. So the increase is necessary because we have basically $330 million worth of, or $326 million worth of improvements needed within our drainage ways within the city. And we've only collected $1.7 million worth of drainage impact fees. So we really have a shortfall of, roughly $324 million worth of improvements. And I guess what I'm seeking is a funding mechanism to try to cover that gap.
Yes, but this is because we hadn't increased the fees earlier, and how do we compare to other cities?
Oh, excuse me, yeah, so. Yeah, I have that in one of my other slides from our previous presentation. Let me hunt that down for you. I apologize. I'm having trouble locating that file.
Well, maybe it doesn't matter so much, Brent. Maybe the real question is, what is the staff recommending?
What I would recommend, Councilwoman Noble, is to adopt the fee and then phase it over a time period.
Works for me.
Councilmember Hurst.
I think that works for me too, but real quick, I just wanted to ask a question, Brent. So, and this is just for clarification, when we do development approvals in the land development code, I'll just use the metro district that I live in, for example. We own our drainage, and we as a metro district have to pay to have it cleaned and maintained and prepared for that 100-year flood by statute. So we have several of those retention or detention ponds built out in most, I would say, if not all, new development. Why does that happen? And then there's still a very significant need, $300 million plus significant need on top of those requirements.
So, yes, thanks for the question, Councilmember Hurst. So, most of your fees would be covering the local drainage improvements. So that would include your stormwater pipes that are actually in the streets and the inlets and that kind of stuff. There are smaller detention facilities for your developments that you have to maintain for water quality purposes. So what we're really doing is regional detention with our particular improvements.
Perfect, thank you. I just wanted to make sure because someone asked me that question and I had a very similar answer, but even though they're smaller, there's a significant cost to maintaining per the water treatment standards.
Yeah, that is a part of the MS4 requirements for the water quality, yes.
Councilmember Douglas.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering how we got to this shortfall, $324 million. That's a significant amount. And was it just that the impact fees were so low to begin with, and then they were never addressed over time that this shortfall happened? And then my other question is, can you explain why you recommend the phase-in as opposed to just not phasing it in, but to start the impact fees as they should be?
Yeah, so why the huge increase? So basically, it's been a really long time since our drainage impact fees have been updated. And, construction costs, they raise about 3.5% per year. And so, we're looking at probably between 150% to roughly 200% increase in construction costs since the year 2000. And so really it's just the city not really thinking strategically, I guess, on, how much things are going to cost in the future. And so I guess the reason I'm recommending the phasing is that we do want to give the development community a chance to adapt their pro forma for any new residential buildings they have going in, because this is going to be quite a sticker shock. We're probably looking at a drainage impact fee for a house, somewhere in the $3,000 to $4,000 range, and they're used to paying a drainage impact fee of about $345 to $400 per residential house. So really the phasing is just to give the developers a chance to, I guess, budget in that increased cost.
Go ahead, Councilmember Douglas.
Oh, yes, thank you. So you're talking about sticker shock, but they should probably realize that they're paying that, the higher amount in other regions, and they're building in other regions. So why, they know they've had a sweet deal here, and so why sticker shock? I mean, they know that they haven't had to pay that, and they know what they're accustomed to paying in other areas.
Sure. I would also be okay with just adopting the full fee if council desired that.
I appreciate that. I just wanted to bring that up because that's something to consider.
Councilmember Hurst.
Yeah, I just wanted to finish my opinion on this. I completely get it. We have a lot of work to do. We also are building in an area that needs drainage, no matter if we're building residential, commercial, industrial. If we're building at all, even farming needs good drainage out here, just because of where we're at. I might be more willing to go to a phased approach, but if we flip the switch tomorrow, I think we're all approaching this like this just cuts into developers' pockets. I mean, it's passed on, 100% passed on cost, and it's probably going to be bonded and managed by the Metro District. And so, to me, we have to be able to recuperate or be able to take that money and put it into drainage projects that make an impact, not only for our future residents, but the residents that live here. If we have another 2013 flood, I think we've taken some great steps to be more prepared for that than we were in 2013. But I think we have a significant path forward, not just in Commerce City. I'm just talking the whole eastern corridor of the Front Range. And so these costs are passed on down to the individual purchase level. So although I do think it has an impact, obvious business change, it has an impact on developers, has an impact on the cost of these houses. Do I think it's necessary? Yes, but without having that discussion, I think we're doing a disservice about this whole process. Is that, increase in cost, that 2,000, 3,000% increase in cost, isn't going to be completely translated into that as a loss of potential revenue for anybody building a house. They're just going to tack it onto the price at the end, and it may not be dollar for dollar, but it's definitely going to be passed on. And so, as much as I think there is sticker shock, I'm not going to be for a long, drawn-out, phased approach. If we have a phase, I think it ends at 6 months.
Councilmember Noble.
I just wanted to clarify that this is for impact fees on new homes?
Yes, it would be for any of the new homes that are developing within those basins. Yes, Councilwoman Noble.
Okay, then actually, Councilmember Hurst got me really nervous when he brought up metro districts, because we have this one multitudinous metro district with many different metro districts, and I just wouldn't want any of the burden to be passed on to any of these residents who have been paying metro district fees for a decade or two already. Could they do that? Could they put it into their refinancing and pay it that way?
I guess I'm not an expert in the financing for the metro districts. I don't know if Deputy City Manager Rogers is on the line, if he would have an answer for that.
Thank you, Brent. If I may, ma'am, if you could repeat your question, I was getting another question in my other ear.
Metro districts and the fee only being on new homes, could a metro district instead, as Councilmember Hurst was pointing out, spread it among all homes in a metro district, not just the new ones, to recoup its costs, like refinance a bond or do something that will then burden existing residents as well?
Thank you, ma'am, and I appreciate you repeating the question. To my knowledge, that would be a no. It would only be tacked on to the new residential at the time that is being approved through the local municipality, in this case, that being us, for that particular piece of property.
Okay, then whatever we can do to make sure that it doesn't happen, which would be the shorter phasing in, it would seem to me, that would be good. I got a lot of hands raised now.
Councilmember Grimes?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Jason, does what you said translate into that goes on the purchase price of individual homes?
Yes, ma'am, and I think to Councilmember Hurst's position, is it a one-for-one? No, but is there some form of it being transferred to that? Yes, but we don't have an exact map to what that is, but we have had conversations with the development community that says, yes, it does occur.
Then I would definitely be supportive of a non-phased approach. I think that's the most transparent. Eyes wide open, when you purchase a home, you know what the price is, and there's no room for question about where that money ends up being paid back.
Councilmember Hurst?
I think Councilwoman Noble's point is right on. I mean, we have to make sure that we're protecting these new fees so they can't be incorporated into old debt or combined, if you will, as Councilwoman Noble was insinuating could possibly happen. And I think that, I'm not an expert, but I think that is built into the Metro District law. It has to be within the area in which that Metro District is serving. But one thing that, again, just for a reference point in these conversations, Metro Districts pay for what the city would pay for if we collected taxes the way that maybe your standard tax collection services are. So all of your infrastructure build out and the bonds that you're paying on your Metro District are what the city really should have paid if we weren't in a growth pace for itself position. And so when we talk about TIF agreements and things like that, same thing. That money's not going to a developer per se, it's going to what the city owes in that development. And so, again, all of these are essential upgrades to our land development code, to our fee schedule, but it's money and projects that the city would be paying for otherwise, so it's going to be up north, especially directly translated into a Metro District debt. How that's managed moving forward can be up to us, and I think will be up to us in a lot of situations, but we have to understand it is just like the city taking on that liability, just in that very centralized area where that improvement's being made.
Mr. Rogers?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And Brent, please correct me if I'm wrong, but obviously with the use of the verbiage today, the sticker shock being what it is, it's also trying to catch us up for well over 28 years of not touching this fee as it relates to keeping up with just the course of doing business with growth and development and inflation and the change of the market as it might be, or the market conditions. So once you get past the sticker shock, we should start to see some balancing out of that continual inflated fee over time to being a much more reasonable and a lower amount, because once again, we are trying to catch up with where we should have been in 2021 terms, as opposed to where we've been is working our way out of 1999, 2000 terms. Is that correct, Brent?
Yeah, that's correct, yes.
Councilmember Douglas?
Thank you. Jason, how can we be assured that these metro districts won't take this opportunity to just mix it in and refinance, such as Councilmember Noble suggested that they could possibly do to absorb this? We don't oversee the metro districts, and so one of the problems with metro districts is the fact that there is no oversight. And how can we be assured that that's not going to happen?
Thank you. I'll take this moment. So I think one of the golden opportunities and the things that you all will have in front of you or back on your table is discussion around metro district reform. And I think I may have heard from some of your colleagues that there's opportunities to evaluate how you look at incorporating certain language and or clarifying certain language within that to meeting this level of expectation that you just brought to my attention. You just brought forward, excuse me.
Okay. Mr. Rogers, or Mr. Tinklenberg?
Thank you, ma'am. I think we have to be really careful here when we start talking about metro districts and these impact fees, because the two are totally separate. And so impact fees are paid by the developers at the time of permit. And so the only way that they can basically pass that on is in the price of the home. The metro districts have no role in that at all. And so it's totally separate from metro districts. So I just want to make sure we don't conflate the two or confuse the two.
Thank Council Member Madera.
So I had some questions on these tables at the end. Is that cost per single-family lot, in the last column, is that the total cost?
Yeah, so the cost for the single-family lots, you're talking about the drainage impact fee with the stormwater utility fee to offset it?
Yes.
Yeah, so that would be a cost per lot, yes. And I just based it on a cost for just a typical single-family lot.
Okay, thank you. I was just confused by the assumption that it was over a 50-year time frame. So.
Yeah, I mean, so I did basically take that big number and divide it by 50 years to spread that cost over for the residents, so it wouldn't be such a big fee every year. I mean, we could pick any time frame, but obviously if we pick a shorter time frame, then the fee would go up if we adopted a stormwater utility fee.
And that fee would be charged directly to residents?
It would be charged directly to residents, yes. And I believe if we were to have an increased tax, it would probably have to go out to the voters.
Okay, yeah, I guess for me, you know, we need to pay for this somehow, so, you know, the fee makes the most sense, and I'm okay whether we phase it in over time or just rip the Band-Aid off and go all at once, because, you know, at the end of the day, we can't have development if when we have floods, these houses are going to get flooded. You know, it just doesn't make sense. You gotta put in the utility for that, and yeah, it's either gets paid for through the development, or we're gonna have to find another mechanism to pay for that. And you know, we all know how it is trying to raise taxes and go to voters and asking for this kind of money. It's not something that's going to be well received. So I think you got to put it up front as one of the fees and build it into the cost of the home, and that way it's transparent, you know, what the cost actually is.
Councilmember Hurst.
Two last things. Brent, what do we need? What do you need from us so we can create a cost of construction fee table? Meaning, and this is what that means to me. Cost of construction is through the roof right now. And there obviously has to be an adjustment period to that. But it has to be tied to some type of cost of construction metric, because if it starts to slow in cost growth, obviously we want to slow down with that, or we wouldn't want to disproportionately increase the fee in a year that's slowed down. So what do you need from us? Is it an ordinance beyond this fee increase that allows for cost of construction fee increases to happen appropriately, either with CPI or something else? I don't know that there's a cost of construction metric measurement out there, but there could be.
Yeah, so I think our next steps would be an ordinance, basically adopting the proposed fees. And within that ordinance, we could include tying an escalator or to some kind of construction cost index. I know CDOT has a pretty decent one that we're using for the road impact fee, but we definitely would want to tie it to some kind of construction cost index. And I could possibly reach out to the Mile High Flood District as they deal with these type of regional projects all the time, and see if they have some kind of construction cost index, especially for the drainage type infrastructure.
Councilmember Hurst, to your question, tying it to a construction cost index, we tend to use the word escalator, but it basically will adjust to the market. So if the market goes down, the fees will go down in relationship to them. So it's not strictly an escalator per se. So that's, I think we all, just as a term of art, tend to assume that. And we had this discussion with the developers in our most recent meeting, and they brought up the same issue about prices are high now, but we expect them to dip back down. So what will there be an appropriate adjustment made to that? And so when Brent mentioned the construction cost index, that gave them a sense of comfort that it would be adjusted to the market.
I think it's plannable as well, right? Like if you're using an index, I mean, hopefully there's other cities in the metro that are likely using some type of similar index, and that way you know what you're getting yourself into on an annual basis. And so, last thing I got to say, and feel like it's my duty to say it, is we just sat through a presentation that heard there's a lot of young people in our community already and continuing to move to our community for good reason. We have, from an affordability standpoint, yeah, maybe it's not affordable, but it is compared to a lot of our neighboring cities. And when we do things like that, like this, again, I'm not saying this is bad, it's necessary, but when we do things like this, again, it creates another layer of making the end product more expensive, which potentially has a negative benefit to who can live in our community. Has to be said. I think that's a very relevant discussion to continue to have as we move forward. But one of the things that I think I saw in that last presentation is I was proud to see how young our community is and its potential. And when we talk about, having a quality community for a lifetime, starting with a good foundational young community as we're growing is a great thing to have. And so continuing to make this a destination for people to come to raise their young families, to have that, is something that we should continue to focus on. And I think trying to manage these costs coming from us while still creating that balanced and thriving community is going to be important. It's not going to be easy. These decisions aren't taken lightly, but obviously it's necessary, and I hope that we can get on that index so we're not in this situation again 15 years from now where we fixed the problem, we forgot about it, and I don't think with this the city management, we will do that, but I don't want us to get into this situation again. So I think the index is a key portion to this discussion, because if we do, flip the switch, at least it'll be more predictable moving forward.
Yes, sir, that comment is right on, and moving forward, we should be proactively adjusting these rates every couple years, if not year to year, to reflect the true costs, so that we don't 10, 15 years down the road find ourselves in the same predicament.
Excuse me, just for those watching, and Joe Wilson, can you identify yourself? Are you a staff member? Can you identify
Yes, ma'am, I'm
yourself?
sorry, Joe Wilson, Public Works Director. I work with Brent.
Thank you. Councilmember Douglas.
So I do want to look at the other side of the coin too. If the developers knew that they weren't paying an adequate amount in this, I'm sure they certainly weren't passing along that cost savings to their purchasers. So as far as, increasing the price of the homes, I mean, market prices have skyrocketed and gone out of reach for so many people. So we do have to have this covered, and it's the cost of doing business, and so you have to look at it from the other side of the coin as well. And I'm not saying that as an attack at all. I'm just pointing it out.
Councilmember Ford.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Brent, for the presentation. I think it's worthwhile to let you all know that 4 years while I was on council, the 8 people that served with me also saw similar requests and shortfalls and how we were going to get there. And we sat into place these prices that would have to be paid. And it wasn't that we didn't account for it, it's that a lot of things have changed in the past or since then. Requirements from the water drainage, what's it called, Brent?
The Mile High Flood District?
Right, have increased. We've seen different floods or flood situations take place that increased pipe sizes, construction costs. A lot of things have changed over the years to cause this escalation. And I absolutely believe that it's a requirement of the development to take care of. I would rather see it be in a short-term escalation than to be done by stormwater fees. And I'll tell you, the only reason I say that is because when we looked into fees years ago, it was Adams County that would have to manage those stormwater fees. And at the time, 50% of what was collected would go to the county for those services. And I would really have a problem with our residents paying for the management being 50% of those costs for collecting a stormwater service fee, as they were back then when stormwater service fees were contemplated. So I would much rather see it be an escalation. The downside is it is going to be an increase in cost to the housing units. That cost will get passed on, and we have to keep in mind that we have to keep the cost of housing affordable enough for our teachers, our firefighters, some of these young people that are moving into our community. So that's where I stand and the way I've seen it escalate over time.
Councilmember Ford, this is Joe Wilson. I would like to suggest that your comment regarding the flood district is a fair and accurate one, because I think over time the requirements have become more strict as well as more expensive in terms of managing the flow to minimize the potential risk to residential areas. So I think that is a fair point to bring up, that the requirements have gone up significantly as well over the past 10 to 15 years.
Thanks, Joe, for stating that. I do, sitting here as being on the past councils and serving with a lot of different people that made decisions on how these things would get funded. Our staff, people have changed, circumstances have changed. Flood control district gets more more heavy requirements. Water quality gets higher requirements. And to sit here and think, oh, well, this really looks like I didn't do a very good job. A lot of it is not that the council that I served with didn't do a good job. Our management team would come and tell us what needed to be done. And we acted just as this council is trying to act, saying, hey, we need to put in place a way for this to be paid for. So I don't disagree with the need. However, things have changed drastically since 2010. And I recall doing the one on the golf course, funding the stormwater regional piece in the golf course back. It had to be back in like '05. But the councils that I worked with were doing their best to be competent in making sure this infrastructure was put into place. But the times have changed drastically, requirements have changed drastically, and we have to get back on top of it to make sure that the infrastructure is in place to manage this community.
Councilmember Noble.
I think that we also have to look at tonight the road impact fees, which haven't been updated since 2000. So do you need more from us in terms of direction, Brent?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Noble. So what I'm hearing is that I will come back, probably it would be the February City Council meeting with an ordinance to raise the fees to the full fee and not phase them over time.
Thank you. I had a question also back to road impact fees. Are those current or are those behind?
Yeah, so that'll be our next presentation, Mayor Pro Tem. So we'll definitely cover that in the next presentation.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other council members with questions? Okay. Thank you tonight, Brent, for your presentation.
All right, I'll move on to the next presentation here. Dylan, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, Brent. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. So this next presentation is for the road impact fee update, and I have with me tonight Jennifer Carpenter, who's going to assist me with this presentation. So just as an overview, we're going to cover the purpose and need, the study area, the application of the fee, our future roadway network, alternatives, and then a summary of the fee alternatives, and then some options for adoption of the ordinance. So the purpose and need, the city is developing rapidly, and the road impact fees have not been updated since 2000. And the road impact fees are based upon older and now outdated construction costs and trip generation numbers. So based on the CDOT construction cost index, it's been typically about a 3.5% growth per year. And so since 2000, that's a 208% increase in construction costs. So we really need to update our road impact fee to be able to fund future capacity improvements to our arterial roadway network. And then just briefly, we've collected about $3 million in our 3 road impact fee zones. And we have a capital need for roadway improvements of roughly $634 million, which leaves us a shortfall of around $630 million. So this basically shows the Northern Range study area. And so Zone 1 is basically the South Platte River to Highway 2. And Zone 2 is basically Highway 2 to Piccadilly. And then Zone 3 is Piccadilly to Watkins Road. So an application of the fees, the road impact fees are only for our arterial roadways, and they only include projects that add capacity. So for example, a road impact fee that could be applied to 104th Avenue would be to basically take it from the existing 4-lane configuration to a 6-lane configuration. Developers could be credited back if they did build capacity improvements on our arterials through the road impact fee. And this slide just shows our future roadway network, and this is based off our 2010 transportation plan. And so you can see our major arterials, which are 6-lane roads, are basically part of 120th Avenue. We have Piccadilly Road, Tower Road, 104th Avenue, 120th Avenue, and Highway 2. Our minor arterial roadways, which are our 4-lane roads, is basically 96th, Chambers Road, Himalaya, 128th, and then 88th Avenue. And then we have our multimodal arterials, which are our 2-lane roads, which is, for example, like Potomac Street, part of Peoria, 112th Avenue, west of Buckley Road or High Plains Parkway. So just an analysis, just to kind of go over what I mentioned previously. So we expect residential build out in 2055, and arterial costs are basically $634 million. As I said before, we've only collected right around $3 million of road impact fees in our 3 zones, which leaves us a shortfall of $630 million. And this slide just covers a little bit of our general improvement districts in the Northern Range. So we have the Northern Infrastructure General Improvement District, which currently is funding $1.7 million for 104th Avenue between the South Platte River and US 85. And then we have our E470 Residential Area General Improvement District, which is basically funding some improvements on 104th Avenue and on Himalaya Parkway. And so the GIDs, the General Improvement Districts, could be reimbursed road impact fees if they are funding arterial capacity improvements. And now I'm going to turn the rest of the presentation over to Jennifer to talk about our alternatives.
Thanks, Brent. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, okay, great. So I'm going to walk you through the various alternatives that we've analyzed. In the Northern Range area, we have an average fee that is across the entire Northern Range. We looked at a fee based on each of the 3 districts that Brent spoke to earlier. And then we looked at another alternative where the district boundaries were revised or modified. And then finally, we will talk about what a fee in the core city might look like. Next slide. All right, so the first alternative is an average fee collected across the 3 districts. This is similar to the methodology that was used to establish the 2000 road impact fee. The benefits for this is that it's easy to calculate the collection and distribution of funds, and it's consistent across the 3 districts. There's no issue with developments avoiding a particular district due to a lower fee in another area. The drawback for this alternative, though, is that the city could collect more funds in one district than they could actually spend in that district, or you could end up with insufficient funds in a particular district. And I will note that at the bottom of each of these alternatives, we show the fees for single family, detached, shopping center, and fast food restaurant for comparison purposes. Next slide. So the second alternative is specific to the road impact fee being calculated for each of the districts based upon capacity improvements that are needed within that district. The advantage to this alternative is that you're collecting the correct amount of funds for each district. And it does eliminate the issue of collecting too much fee or too little in each of the districts. The drawback is that it could incentivize development in one area or over another, and it's more complex to administer. So if you look at the fees at the bottom, District 2 in this alternative is very similar to the average fee in the prior alternative. District 1 is about 50% higher, and District 3 is about 15% lower. Next slide. All right, so the third and final alternative in the Northern Range looks at shifting the boundary between Districts 2 and 3 from Piccadilly Road to E470. This is similar to the prior alternative. In this scenario, you're collecting the right amount of funds for each district. And additionally, this alternative puts the future growth east of E470 all into one district, into District 3. The drawback is that it increases the fee in District 2 and lowers the fee in District 3. The reason for that shifting cost is that the new 4-lane roads in District 3 only cost slightly more than widening of roads in District 2 by 2 lanes. So the 4-lane roads would provide twice the capacity for less cost. The biggest drawback is that this scenario can incentivize development in District 3 over the other 2 districts. Next slide. So the core city, during our last council meeting with the prior council, there was a discussion about what a fee would look like in the core city. So this slide shows you what the boundaries would include, and it's based off of the city boundaries and the growth areas. Next slide. So the core city fee would be an average for the area. There are no districts in this case. And this alternative shows what the fee for the core city would look like. So it's less than the Northern Range fees because the way it's calculated, the trip lengths for each of the land uses is lower. So essentially, a driver has to travel shorter distances to get to their destination. So development isn't charged as much for road improvements. The fee would mainly be dedicated to adding capacity to Quebec Street and 72nd Avenue. And the benefit of this fee is that it would provide a future funding source for capacity improvements in the core city. However, there is a drawback, and that is that it could deter redevelopment in the core city. Next slide. So I'm going to cover some different options for adopting the road impact fee. Some of these are similar to what you've already seen for the drainage impact fee. The first is adopting the road impact fee as is. The second is phasing it. The third is phasing it with a different scenario of percentages. And then the fourth is an alternative phasing by the development process. And again, similar to the drainage impact fee, staff suggests that the fee ordinance have an escalator that's tied to the construction cost index so that they can adjust the fee automatically every year, starting in 2024. Next slide. All right, so option one is to adopt the proposed road impact fees without phasing over time. And so as we've talked about, there are 3 options in the Northern Range: a fee that's an average across the Northern Range, the fee by district, which is that second alternative, and then the third alternative, again, being the fees by district, but with a revised district boundary between districts 2 and 3. And then finally, whether or not to adopt a fee for the core city. All right, next slide. So option 2, this alternative is very similar to the drainage impact fee, and that the phasing of the adoption of the road impact fees could be done such that 5%, you would see a 5% increase in January of 2022, followed by a 35% increase in July, another 35% in October, and then the final 25% in January of 2023. Next slide. The third option is what we're calling a consistent phasing over time. So essentially, you increase the fee by 20% every 3 months, starting in January of 2022, and that would end January of 2023. Next slide. And the final option, option 4, is the alternative phasing by development process. So in this alternative, we could collect 25% of the fee at building permit, 50% at certificate of occupancy, and then 25% a year after certificate of occupancy. That 25% at the end could be secured with a letter of credit. And I believe that is it. Last slide. So we are open for questions or discussion.
Are there any council members with any questions? Councilmember Noble.
First, do you have a recommendation for us? And second, you mentioned the 2010 transportation plan, which I guess would be from the comprehensive plan at that point. But there were several things in the comprehensive plan that weren't put into place from 2010, including the future land use map. And I personally I just can't fathom a 6-lane highway running from crossing at an angle from Tower Road to Buckley in an area that my ward wants to see as a town center. So I would think that that 6-lane highway is a big portion of this budget. And I really don't think that we should decide that that town center is off the table at any point here. But what is your suggestion for how to handle the road impact fee?
So my suggestion would be to adopt option 2, which would be, for the northern range, it would be to have a specific fee for each zone. And that way we're correcting the appropriate amount of money in each zone. So that would be my recommendation, would be to option 2.
Brian? This is
Yes,
Joe
Joe.
Wilson. To Councilmember Noble's question regarding, I believe she's referring to High Plains Parkway. I think, wouldn't the amount of money there, wouldn't that include expanding that from 4 to 6 lanes, not the entire 6 lanes?
Well, it would include future planning for a 6-lane road for High Plains Parkway. That's correct, right, Jennifer?
Yeah, I guess what I just, if I put it another way, Oakwood is responsible for putting that road in currently, and it's currently designed to be constructed as 4-lane with the capability of being expanded to 6 lanes if or when that need may arise. And that expansion from 4 to 6 is what's in these numbers, not the full 6 lane.
I would have to double check that. Generally speaking, though, the improvements that are included here are things that have not been built to date.
Okay.
But I can double check that while we're talking.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hurst.
Yeah, I think the sticker shock's going to be a little harder on this one. I'd like to propose a compromise of a couple of what you put up there. I know this is something that I would suggest we look at later, but I think right now when we're looking at growth opportunity, it's not just east of 104th. I'm sorry, east of Tower Road up north. It's Highway 2 and 104th. It's a couple different locations. And I don't want to disincentivize growth in the developed area opposed to growth in the undeveloped area. So one of the things I think we should take a look at is having a set fee for the northern range, one general fee, and then one for the core city. And I really think if we don't do one for the core city, again, I think it should be less than the one up on the northern range. But I think if we don't do one for the core city is going to be left out, or it's going to be, do we pay for this, or do we pay for this improvement while this development's happening in the core city? I really think if we find a compromise to have one set northern range fee and then a separate but smaller one for the southern portion of the city to not disincentivize redevelopment or development down south. I think it's important just to make sure that we're covering our needs in the south as it redevelops as well.
So Councilmember Hurst, so just to clarify, what you're suggesting is eliminating the 3 zones and just having one large zone in the northern range?
Temporarily. I think having the 3 zones are key, but I think we're starting to see what the north can be, but I don't want to get too far in front of it and disincentivize. I'm just using an example. I don't know anything about this, but disincentivize a shopping center from coming to 90 or from 104th and Highway 2, or and then instead it goes to 104th and Tower Road or something like that. I want to make it so it's kind of a fair development opportunity in the whole side of the north, and then the south has a different, smaller impact fee, road impact fee moving forward as well.
So Brent, if I'm understanding Councilmember Hurst's point, I think he's suggesting the northern range average fee. Would that be?
Yes, sir, Joe. The northern range average fee would be what I'm suggesting for the north, and then having the suggested road impact fee for the south as a standalone.
Okay. And we do have a notional average for that already calculated.
It's just a suggestion, though. I'm willing to hear what everybody else thinks and can spin off that.
Mr. Tinklenberg.
Thank you, ma'am. Brent asked my primary question, but then a follow-up, you said temporarily. So what do you mean by that?
I think identifying the needs in 3 different zones is a good thing for us to at least have a baseline understanding. So similar to what we're doing with the drainage impact fee, I think we need to reassess this. I think today, having more of a blanket north range fee allows kind of that open slate still from if we're bringing in a specialty grocer, they say, okay, well, we're looking at these 2 properties, all things are equal, we're going to get it right. But if you don't make all things equal, there's going to be incentivized to move towards the cheaper solution, right? And so I want to just have a level playing field. So when we have opportunity, we're not creating one area over the other having a better opportunity for that development. It will be the right place to develop because all things are equal. Now, of course, that's not considering access and everything else, but we don't have an actual comparison on the plate in front of us to be able to do that too. I just think to continue to have what's available in terms of for sale, zoned appropriately for development, I think all those things should be equal from a fee structure, and then maybe in 3 to 5 years as this development continues to happen, we look at separating those back out to collect finally what we need to complete each of those 3 zones. Say if from the river to Highway 2 sees full growth development potential and you see all that area fill in, well, now you really want to focus those fees to come from, zones 2 and 3 in the north. And so it just gives us a little bit of flexibility without shooting ourselves in the foot immediately.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I really like the idea of an average fee for the northern range rather than districting for all the same reasons that Councilmember Hurst has already cited. My question, and I apologize if this was covered, my question is why wouldn't we implement the same fees for the core city? Because I can see a detriment to actually collecting less for the core city than the northern range, and we end up with this problem of why isn't there enough money to do the same kinds of projects in the core city that there would be in the northern range, and we're kind of building in a divide again.
So Jennifer, can you take that?
Yeah, I can answer that. So when we do the analysis for this, One of the things that is always in the back of our mind is to make sure that it is legally defensible. And when you have a really dense area of development, like you have in the core city, people don't have to drive as far. So the key factor in the core city and what makes those fees lower is that there's shorter travel distances that people have to drive. So they're not impacting the roads nearly as much as somebody who's further away from all the places they want to be. So let's think of it from a perspective of urban versus rural. If you're in an urban area, you can drive a quarter mile to get a whole bunch of different places. But if you're in the rural area, you have to drive 20 miles to get to the grocery store. And so you're using more road, and that's why your fee is going to be higher. Does that make sense?
It does. It still seems like there's a really big discrepancy between what's being proposed for the core city and the northern range. I'd like to hear from other council members if they see that same kind of hurdle coming at us down the road in 10 years.
Ms. Carpenter, along that same line, then who's going to cover the difference in the cost? The city, or who would cover the difference?
So the whatever the city doesn't collect in fees, the city would have to come up with a way to pay for the improvements, whether it's through the general fund or grants or something else. But the fee that we have identified in the core city is what is needed to construct the two roads or to add capacity to the two roads that we identified, which were Quebec Parkway and 72nd Avenue.
Jennifer, if we raised the core city fees to be consistent with the northern range, wouldn't we also run the risk of collecting too much money that we couldn't exercise? Because generally speaking, you'd have to use the funds in the area that you collected them in.
That is correct, Joe.
Yeah. So there's probably a way to classify the whole northern range together, but it would be much more difficult to tie the core city to that same type of characteristics as the whole northern for fee purposes.
Councilmember Madera?
I guess to begin with, I'd be okay with, getting rid of the districts and doing one whole northern area to make it even throughout, in terms of development opportunity. But yeah, I'm kind of with staff on this one where in the core city, most of that infrastructure, that road infrastructure is already built. So, if you're charging the same fees as up north, where you have to build new roadways to have access into and out of the subdivision and neighborhoods, you're not going to have that because for the most part, they're already on a road network that they'll be building off of. So if you have that road impact fee, it's going to be more difficult unless you're widening roads and doing things to justify those costs. The one question I do have in terms of the core city, I don't see anything for industrial traffic over here. And, that does cause significantly more wear and tear on the roads and would impact the core city. Is that included in these fees?
Yeah, we have a whole list of, I think, 20 or 30 land uses. But just to give you all an example and a way to compare the different fees, we put in those three that are in each of the slides. But there is industrial included, and for any land uses that are not included in the list, we can calculate it as well. And we've put a way in the report to be able to do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Hurst?
Just to follow up on that, road impact fees are not gas taxes. These are during development. The numbers for the impacts to roads from trucking is Trucking is 8% of Colorado's traffic and pays 40% of our HUTF. And so how our HUTF funds are sent back to us, it's not a large number, but 40% of that's generated by diesel fuel tax. And so we're already disproportionately coming after those businesses for the impacts. They don't cause as much impacts as they pay, as well as your sales and use tax. All of those have built-in fees and funds built for those impacts that are to our roadways. I just don't want us to chop ourselves off at the knees by not understanding what we're asking for and then passing those costs on to businesses that already pay an incredible amount towards those services.
Yes, so Councilmember Hurst and Jennifer, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but so the fees are based upon the number of trips that a site basically generates, right? So, you know, a fast food restaurant is going to generate a lot of trips, so that is going to have a higher fee. And obviously a single family home is going to have less trips, so it's going to generate a lower fee. And so it really depends on the number of trips that a development is creating.
That's correct. And then when you look at this, not to complicate things, but when you look at the size of a building, so the fee for the fast food, I think, was around $40,000 for the average fee, but a fast food restaurant is typically only about 3,000 square feet, so $120,000 for them, versus a shopping center who is typically, you know, 100,000 or 200,000 square feet. And so if you calculate that out, I don't know what those numbers are. I don't have them in front of me right now. That's the actual fees that development would be paying. And this is new development.
Councilmember Ford?
In these costs, are you taking into consideration full build out of a lot of the roads up north, like 6-lane 120th Avenue, 6-lane Chambers Road, what those full build outs would be? Are those numbers calculated into this as well?
Yes, they are. We looked at the transportation plan and used that as our basis to determine what full build out would look like.
So these numbers are based on full build out of all the roads up north and in the south? And, you know,
so full build out of the arterials,
right, of
all roads,
of the city's responsibility,
mm-hmm.
Right? So I want to make that clear because the developers pay their share and stuff, but you're going to have. We're talking about the city's responsibility to build the roads. It's a financing mechanism to cover our costs long term to create the infrastructure necessary. However, where I get frustrated is the money the city put into Tower Road, put into Highway 2. When you talk about the transitory traffic that migrates through our city, there's no capturing any of that, and the burden is solely upon our residents or development within our city. There is growing up here, Quebec Street was 2-lane with dirt road edges. I mean, there was no curb and gutter or anything. And if you go down Quebec today at any time of day, the amount of traffic that is transitory to go from North Glen, Thornton, those places, they play a huge burden onto our roads as well. And we have no way to offset those costs other than to place it on the burden of our developers, which also increase costs to our residents because that is passed on. So I'm just trying to get a full scenario of what we're talking about here, because the trucking industry, and I know back in the day, we put into place a tipping fee for all trash trucks that would go and use the landfill to capture some of that money. But there are a lot of businesses, because where we're located and with the industrial need, that do business here, and I'm okay with capturing that. However, there is a ton of transitory traffic that uses our roadways every day to get to and from a place that's not inside Commerce City at all. And I hate placing that on the burden of our residents if there are alternatives. But if I had to go with a plan, I would say I agree with most of the council members that have spoken with one fee blanketing the north and one fee blanketing the south. But the south doesn't have a lot of development opportunities left. I mean, there are some, like the drive-in, and there are a few properties. But I just can't imagine that the south, based on those kind of fees, are going to raise enough money to make a difference. But they also have the infrastructure in place today, like Councilman Madero was saying.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. I guess I'm envisioning more opportunity for redevelopment in the core city rather than new development. And I'd hate to see us miss the opportunity to capture road impact fees if we put in place, if we put this in place now and then we start seeing redevelopment happen in the core city, do we put ourselves behind?
Yes, thank you for the question, Councilmember Grimes. So we do charge our current road impact fee when a property redevelops, and I'm envisioning that we would charge this fee for redevelopment also.
Understood. Thanks for the comment, Brent. I just wanted to make sure that we really parse out if it's enough if we start seeing redevelopment in the core city. That's all. So if staff is recommending that this is sufficient even for redevelopment, that's enough for me.
Councilmember Hurst.
Sorry, as I've listened to this conversation, I just wanted to point out one thing. Not suggesting we count our chickens before we hatch, but every arterial road is now in the playing field for federal help. So if we did build a bank, per se, in the south, and you're looking to widen an arterial, you, in the past, did not qualify for federal aid funding. Now we do. That's fairly new. Again, that could play an impact on 120th, or it couldn't, but it at least gets us, with these fees and having a bank at the city to be able to do local match is one of the biggest steps into getting federal grant approvals. And so having that will be just in and of itself a huge advantage that we didn't once have in this city.
Can I make a comment real quick, Brent?
Sure, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that while Brent is recommending an escalator to adjust for construction costs for the road impact fee, that doesn't prohibit council from requesting an update, a full update of the road impact fee. And the full update would include reevaluating what full build out looks like. So when the comp plan and transportation plan are revised, if they're drastically different from what the old one looked like, that's something that could be reevaluated. Also, if the city were to go and get a whole bunch of funding for a lot of these arterial roads, that would then be removed, or just, the portion of it that the city's not paying for would be removed from the fee. So it doesn't prohibit council from asking for this to come back and being revised because, major changes have happened. I think the point of the escalator is just to make sure that we don't get 20 years behind like happened in the past.
Councilmember Douglas.
Yes, I have so many of the concerns, especially that Councilmember Ford has, and Councilmember Madera as far as the industrial, and then the redevelopment in the south. Also, are these just for new developments and redevelopment, or is that going to impact the developments that's already underway, like at the Greyhound dog track, which is going to have a huge impact on our roads? I mean, we're increasing population there by multifold. So we have to take all of this into consideration, and being $630 million behind And I understand it's over a 20-year period, but we really got to take a deep dive into this, and we've got to figure this out so that it does address the fact that our residents are impacted by this, because we do have the pass-through and the industry that's here, that especially in the south over by Suncor area, and then off of 96 over in that area, or is it 88th? I believe it's 88th. The dips in the road are so bad you can barely drive through there now, and I don't see anything in the future that's going to address any of that. So I have some deep concerns about all of this.
The fee is collected at time of permit, so it's only new construction that pays the fee. It would not be existing residential or existing businesses. Unless a business were expanding, for example, then there would be, pardon me, an impact report on that business, and the fee would be applied. So it's only for new construction, whether it's redevelopment or, greenfield, basically. So just want to make that clear.
I think Roger hit it spot on. New construction, redevelopment, new development, greenfield development, brownfield. It's, once again, at that point of collection of the fee of the collection at time of building permit, and how you look at that from an impact on continuing momentum that started to gain. Obviously, that's internal conversations that need to be handled and discussed as it relates to a varying degree of land uses that you want to be able to support. So, that's a conversation as well that we haven't had, but we'll be able to bring forward with you when an ordinance does come back.
Councilmember Ford?
Brent, just to give me some kind of an idea, what would, if this was in place, a McLean or the Lowe's warehouse or Amazon would have had to pay for this fee if it was in place at the time of development? If you have an idea, just an estimate, so that kind of gives us an idea of what we're talking about, so that we're not derailing development as well, especially development that we need.
So Jennifer, do you happen to have what a warehouse fee is per 1,000 square foot handy?
I have the fees up. I'm looking real quick. So, yeah, general light industrial park. Does one of those fit?
And Brent, just
business park.
And Brent, just so that you're aware, Amazon was 247,000 square feet, 850 in building size.
That was going to be the next question. Thank you. Which do you think fits it best, Brent?
Well, I think you'd said general light industrial. I think that's
general light industrial. So the cost for general light industrial was $3,088 per 1,000 square feet.
So on a 500,000 square feet. McLean.
McLean was 500,000. Okay.
Yep.
So at 247,000 square feet, you're looking at a fee of, if I calculated this right, and you can double check me, Brent, 762,000. Does that sound right?
Correct.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So for McLean being 150,000 square feet, you're talking about a fee of about 150,000 on top of whatever other fees they paid to be able to come in?
So you said McLean's was 150,000 square feet?
No, they're 500,000.
Oh, $500,000, okay.
That would be virtually twice the lows. Right?
Yeah,
Talking about-
I think you're about 140,000 based on the last number you gave us.
500,000 square feet at 3,000 per square foot, you're talking 1.5 million.
1.5
I like that too.
1.5 million.
I have a question too. So as current construction is being built and permits are being pulled, will they be paying the pass fee or the current updated fee?
Well, we could pass the ordinance to go effective immediately, or, I mean, we could have it go effective at some time in the future. But I would think that we would recommend having it go into effect immediately upon adoption, and then any future building permits would pay the new fee.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hurst?
Roger, can I just ask you a general question? Again, the math shows us why we need this. But when we were looking at those specific developments, and then we have some coming up that have code names and such, they're very competitive, meaning there wasn't much separating us and surrounding communities. A lot of times we talk about we're very fair in terms of pricing, but our water connection tap fee might be the distinct, the factor that pushes us to be more expensive developing. Realistically, this puts us in the similar alignment in fees with our neighbors, I think, but what do you think this does overall in that competitive market if we're adding, 200,000 to $1 million on top of our fees up front for a large development type?
It's going to depend on the development, first of all, but in general terms, let me make a general statement. City Attorney's Office had ruled previously that we cannot waive impact fees. So to be competitive, depending on what the surrounding communities are offering, we would probably need to offset some of that from use tax, as an example. So again, it would have to be calculated, looked at in terms of the entire competitive package.
It's going to come from somewhere, maybe not.
Councilmember Grimes?
Thank you. Councilmember Hurst, I hear what you're saying loud and clear, and we certainly need to take that into consideration as we look for, certain economic development to happen in the city. I'd rather see us address incentives on a case-by-case basis, so that we don't find ourselves behind the 8 ball, so to speak, on impact fees, 10 or 20 years down the road. Maybe sometimes it doesn't make sense. Maybe the fee is much too large, depending on the size of a building or the particular impacts of the business or industry. But I think that we could address those on a case-by-case basis as incentives.
Councilman Hurst?
I guess, I agree, actually. I need to clarify my position. I'm in support of this. Again, I think we have to have those discussions. But I also think if we don't keep our roads in good quality, businesses aren't going to come here and develop. So if this is a huge, like a maintenance thing, right? Like if you want to sell your city and you want good development to come here, commercial, residential, restaurants, industrial buildings, one of the key things we always hear is access, and then that clean access, that the road conditions not causing traffic hazards, which causes congestion, is a good place to start, I would say. Having nice roads with smooth transitional traffic really allows for good development access too. So I think this is kind of a sales pitch moving forward as well, is to preserve the integrity of our infrastructure for our city for longevity of business success. So I think it is going to be a bit of sticker shock. We all see that. But it has to be part of our story as to what steps this council is taking in our supporting city management to ensure that any business that comes here can continue to be successful 25, 30 years from now, because we're taking those tough actions today to make this place a great place to do business for the foreseeable future. And so, you know, with my support, the only thing I would request is that we work our reasoning into our sales pitch from an economic development standpoint.
Mr. Rogers?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and I think Councilmember Hurst hit on a topic and a piece that we have not discussed, which is the, lack of better words, the soft skills of communicating and educating not just the development community, but ultimately as well the end users that we want to attract as it relates to the new improved fee. What is that benefit that we gain, that you gain, help us to help you, to help us long term? And that's a key thing that we need to wrap into this as part of a step two, in addition to adding the fee or increasing the fees to whatever you all adopt, in being able to, once again, get back out there in front of those who we want to remain engaged in developing, building out our city, developing, delivering key infrastructure, and at the same time, those who are coming to visit and understanding the competitive advantage that by having a 4-lane, 6-lane, and or a regional drainage pond is going to benefit them over the long course of the life cycle of their building and of their facility here at the city. So Councilmember Hurst had a key thing that I wanted to bring up.
Just off that, Mr. Rogers, when we're looking at the big picture of the potential impacts of a fee increase like this, do you think it could potentially have a positive impact in terms of like a TIF agreement? We talk about planned communities such as Reunion, but let's just say another one comes up. And we're looking at a TIF agreement to try to recover some costs that the city would have had to put forward to make that development happen, right? If we have this fee in place and we can build the infrastructure using this fee, could we potentially be removing ourselves from a TIF liability in the future, meaning we're not going to have to give up that tax increment financing agreement because we already have a bank in place to support this development as it comes?
Yes, I'll say that. I'm not even going to have to give a long-winded speech. Simply yes, that's a benefit.
Councilmember Ford?
It's been a while, but I don't know when the city has done their last impact fee study, including the water district fees and other fees, and where that puts us at a competitive or uncompetitive standing with our surrounding area. That's pretty important as well.
So good thing that you asked that question, Councilmember Ford. We are actually in contract negotiations with a vendor that we've gone through a competitive process for the turn of the new year to take us through a 6 to 8 month process and looking at what's the full freight of our impact fee cost. What's the cost of doing business here in Commerce City with growth and development across all land use types, not necessarily looking just at road impact fee and bringing in the drainage fee, but also looking at public service and general facilities for, does the Civic Center need to expand, for example, because of just our burgeoning growth? How do we as an organization keep up with that growth and being able to provide the variety of services and amenities? And also looking at not just impact fees, but looking at other programmatic fees that may be entitlement application cost, or our programs at Eagle Point in Bison Ridge. How are we making sure that we have the right cost recovery philosophy that you all adopt, you all set as policymaking, and we are going out and implementing and capturing correctly throughout those various fees various fees.
And I think our residents and this council deserve to see where we would sit with these fees in place on a cost of doing business in the city. If you're a retail user that wants to come here versus going to Brighton, Prairie Center, Thornton, I think we need to see where we sit because we're going to have to get a lot better at attracting with the soft side of it, like you said, if we are higher for cost for development of those type of uses.
I will share with you, I appreciate that, sir. One of the aspects that we will be able to bring to the table is a comparative analysis of where we stand with other municipalities in Adams County, but also ultimately where we want to be able to grow to with other competitive municipalities, such as the city of Aurora, city and county of Denver, just because of proximity. So you will have a full freight of information when making those decisions.
Thank you. Before we move on to reports, I would like to call a 10-minute recess break. I just wanted to make sure, Brent and Jennifer, were you guys finishing to make sure before we move on to council reports, if any other council members had any more questions? Do you need direction, Brent, from the council?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem, I just wanted to get council's direction on if we can move forward with an average fee for the Northern Range and then of the fee for the core city.
Councilmember Hurst?
Yes, for me.
From Councilmember Noble?
I have no objection.
Yeah, so it seems like a consensus just to move forward at, no objections.
With the full fee, just for clarification?
Yes.
First?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is that okay? Thank you tonight for the presentations.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you.
Thanks. At this time, we'd like to move on to reports. I'd like to invite our city manager, Roger Tinklenberg, to give his report.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Couple items that I do want to bring to your attention. One is I handed out a memo to council, handed it out at each of your chairs regarding council meetings and keeping in compliance with the health order. There are basically 4 viable options. We came up with a couple silly ones as well, but I gave you the serious ones. One is meet outdoors, but unfortunately we don't have the equipment to facilitate that. And given the hour of the evening where it begins to get dark, that's not a practical option. There is the option of distanced seating, which is what we have tonight and had for the last couple meetings. By keeping you distanced, you can speak without having to wear a mask. Unfortunately, as you can tell from the seats that are along the windows, it's very restricted in terms of public access and doesn't really allow any participation from the public other than via Zoom or Channel 8. So you had also discussed that you weren't satisfied with this type of an arrangement. The third arrangement that would meet with the health order is if everyone wore masks even while speaking. You noticed tonight Sam Light from CIRSA did that. He spoke the entire time while wearing a mask. So that's one option that would comply with the health order. The other is to become a fully vaccinated facility. And what that means is everyone on council, all of staff, would need to show proof of vaccination, and then anyone entering the facility for a council meeting would have to also present proof of vaccination. So that's what it means to become a fully vaccinated facility. And it can be just for council meetings, or it can be 100% of the time, so that flexibility is available to us. We are in the process of obtaining information from our staff to see what percentage of our staff are vaccinated. That's not the same as requiring vaccination. We are not requiring vaccination at this time, but we are requiring them to report whether they're vaccinated or not vaccinated, and that's anonymous information that is turned into our Human Resources Department. So the items under fully vaccinated means that we would have to require that proof in order to enter, and anyone who is not vaccinated then would have to participate via Zoom remotely. So going back to the mask order, in terms of being a mask requirement facility, again, you could give a speech so long as you're 12 feet away from non-household members. Now, what that means is if you're sitting at the dais, the person next to you is not your household member, and therefore you would have to wear a mask all the time and while you speak as well. So those are our two options in terms of meeting from the dais and remaining compliant with the health order. So I wanted to lay that out for you. And I didn't know if you wanted to discuss that tonight or take it home and think about it and discuss it next Monday on the 20th.
Councilmember Hurst.
I'd like to take it home and sit on it and think about it. And my reasoning is because the governor had a much different story today than I've ever heard him speak, or yesterday. And I don't want to say I'm directly quoting, but he said, the pandemic is over and nobody at no health official can tell you what to wear. So I'm assuming people are going to change their position based off his comments.
I would prefer we take it home also when our mayor and, everyone is present.
Sure. Okay. Then I'll move on. We have still remaining at about 175 active land use applications, so that's holding pretty steady. Staff is currently reviewing development plans for a Dollar Tree store and Ziggy's Coffee in the Northern Range. And there's also a development that's being reviewed at Tower and Second Creek Plaza Drive, and that would be a mixed commercial project, including an extended stay hotel, a gas C-store, and 3 quick-serve restaurants. In November, we issued 1,000, or through November, I should say, from the beginning of the year, we issued 1,516 residential permits. That's both single-family and multifamily. In terms of other development, there's a Starbucks Coffee under review. That'd be along Tower Road in the DIA-TC development, which is down there by 81st Avenue approximately. In terms of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, we've committed $1,318,000 so far through last week. Code enforcement in the past week had 183 cases and achieved a 97% compliance rate with that. They also issued 53 violations notices. In terms of Village Crest, I had reported to you previously on Village Crest, and the management company there has started with spraying for the roach infestations, but there's still several tenants who would not let them access into their units in order to spray, so they're working through those issues. The defective smoke detectors have been corrected, and the management company is working up a plan to tackle the other issues. There is the site-wise ribbon cutting this Thursday on the 16th, and that's at noon. And that's a company that provides utility construction and engineering services in the Front Range. So that's a good addition to the community in terms of employment. And then also just a reminder of the Shop Local effort, which is through Shop Where I Live program. And then in terms of Public Works, there is a tour that is coming up on the 17th, and that is for the I-270 and Vasquez improvements. Currently, it's just Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas and Councilmember Madera that are signed up for that. And then the staff for Public Works is performing routine daily operations like pavement management, which is pothole patching and shoulder maintenance and grading, that type of thing, as well as street sweeping and some weed control, traffic sign maintenance and replacement. They're replacing stop signs that were knocked down, that type of thing. They're also doing some grading on 112th Avenue between Tower and Parkside, And the first step of that is to till in additional gravel material where the road needs additional gravel. For Parks, Recreation, Golf, staff is working with Public Works and Suncor to identify a specific location at Adams Heights Park or another nearby location to put in some of that air monitoring equipment that Suncor is installing. And once that's been finalized, the lease agreement will be brought back to council for that. And then staff will be delivering those project present gifts to the partnering schools over the week as well. Staff is also working with Cultivando to develop and implement a wellness program, and hope to have a presentation to council in the spring to give you an update about that. And in terms of the Paradise Island vandalism that we experienced, staff is working with Front Range Patrol to modify patrol times to enhance security at that facility. That's it for my update. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Councilmember Hurst.
All right, thanks for that update. It just made me think of something real quick. I know that snow removal can do this with the years just because of the way the snow works. But we're going to save pretty significantly if the pattern the pattern stays. I mean, we're several events usually by this time of the year. I don't care if the plan says that we're going to put it in a bank towards getting in front of future storms, but can we start talking about, or can you guys start talking about internally a plan on how that cost savings is going to be utilized moving forward? Because I'm assuming, I can't remember, I know there's a number that we've read in budget approval, but we set aside a decent chunk of change for snow removal, for the material, for the de-icer, for the labor. And we might not be saving a ton in labor because we still have to pay employees to be here, but we're saving money just as the state is. And so if we can have a game plan so we can be in a better position next time we have a terrible November and December, I think that would be good use of a down year, if you know what I mean.
Yes, every budget we do have a carryover. Knock on wood, hopefully that continues every year. But and some of that is brought back as a reappropriation in the June-July timeframe. But certainly we can take another look at how we deploy that for the future.
Did any other council members have any other questions for our city manager? Councilmember Douglas.
Yes, Roger, I am so glad that Village Crest is being looked into, but did you happen to ask if any of them had had their rent increase issue addressed?
I'm going to turn that over to Deputy City Manager Rogers to see if he's aware of that. I am not aware of action on that.
Thank you, Roger. If I may, Council Member Douglas, the question that you have is in regards to the management company raising rent by 10%, if I'm not mistaken?
I don't know what the percentage was, but I did hear that somebody say that their rent was increased by $200 a month. That's significant.
So specifically, our staff has not asked that question. I think I can go back and have another conversation with my team, but I think at the same time, we have to be sensitive to certain, I'll say, standards and rules that are permissible under state law, allowing for increases in rent, subject to AMI that's also increased over time that allows for that adjustments. Once again, I'd want to go back and speak to our staff to be able to get you exact information, but to my knowledge, we have not had a direct conversation with respect to rent with Village Crest. And just so that we're all aware, we as a city do not have standards or stipulations in place that speak to rental controls for both affordable and or fair market value units.
And I understand that, however, you know, we have to watch out for our citizens as well. And that unit, that complex is tied to the housing authority, isn't that correct?
So the rent is actually stipulated through CHAPA. And so what happened during the pandemic is a lot of affordable housing management companies didn't raise the rent. And so when the rent increases came for this year, they're bumping it the maximum they can. So the housing authority doesn't have any stipulation on the rent unless we own the property, which we don't own Village Crest. We're limited partner, less than 1% interest on that. So what we're seeing, not just in Commerce City, but throughout the metro area, is that a lot of these companies that didn't increase rent during the pandemic, during 2020, are raising rent to the maximum that CHAPA is allowing. So that's most likely what's happening here, but you know, definitely need staff to look into it to make sure that that's...
Yeah, because, and I'm going to practice speaking with a mask on since that was mentioned earlier, but we have a duty to protect our citizens and to make sure that we hold these people who are making money off of our residents accountable, so that they can't just do whatever they want to make up for. I mean, they have there has to be something in place that we're if those people just came through a pandemic.
CHAPA's the who does that. They're an arm of the state.
Yes, I totally understand CHAPA. I've been a realtor for 28 years, and my specialty is affordable housing, which there is none right now at all.
So I guess
everybody's priced out of the market, but we've got to take care of our most vulnerable, the people who need housing, and we've got to do something about it.
So how, I guess, is the question.
Let's figure that out. We need to do it.
CHAPA's...
Okay, we're going to move on to more questions. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Councilmember Noble?
I would also be concerned about any retaliatory action against the women who testified, not testified, but spoke to our city council, if we can make certain that there's been no retaliation against them. And the other is that, at the very least, that our housing office prepare a flyer or something in English and Spanish to share with everyone about our rent and mortgage assistance, which I think still exists, correct?
Mm-hmm. Our emergency rental assistance, yes. The marketing efforts that the housing authority has contracted with is through Adams County, so we can communicate back to them about the various forms of media that have been put out and see what we can also do to, what can I say, to enhance and to increase those efforts.
That would be good, because if you were in substandard housing, it's a little, shocking to get a rent increase of that size. So it'd be great to be able to help them. Thank you.
Did anyone else have any questions for the city manager?
How do you sign up for the I-270 tour?
I believe as of this moment, given that we have, the focus as of today is for the council wards that are impacted by I-270. That does not preclude us being able to go back to CDOT and scheduling additional tours with council members that are interested.
I just misunderstood. I thought you said that there were only 2 that were signed up, so I thought that others could. Thank you.
Moving on to our city manager, Matt Hayden, for his report. Mr. Hayden, would you please give your report?
I only have a couple of things. Can you guys hear me all right with this? I'm not used to using this kind of microphone. A couple of things to report to you. This morning, the Water Quality Control Commission, in response to the recent petition addressing Regulation 38, the anti-degradation rule, did go ahead and schedule a hearing for next year on that rule that would affect the South Platte River designations. So that is the result you're hoping for. This is the one that you authorized the letter that went out over the mayor's signature to Governor Polis in support of that petition. So that means that we'll have a hearing in September, on September 12th and 13th of 2022. So I would anticipate coming to you to get some more direction at some time as to what you want our involvement to be there. But based on the letter that we sent out in October, I'm guessing that we'll try to get heavily involved, but we'll get direction from you in a more formal setting. The other thing I want you to be aware of is based on the action that and that letter that we took, we learned some information about a potential conflict with outside counsel. For quite some time, we've been using Ranch and Raish to do our water acquisition work, not water quality work. They've just been doing water acquisition work for us. And in contemplating filing our own petition with regard to Rule 38, we discovered in talking to them that they actually represent clients that would be or that are in direct conflict with us if they were to do water quality work for us, but again, they don't. So in order to avoid any conflicts with them, we will not ever be retaining them to do any water quality work for us. And to that end, and just so you know, they have done work before the Water Quality Control Commission on behalf of Suncor and on behalf of Coors, Molson Coors. So those entities have taken a position that would be opposite of what ours would be, and has been, really. So, and then just to make sure that they don't have any ethical situations, we went ahead and executed waivers so that we don't run into problems in the past, so that they've disclosed to us where their conflicts are. And of course, because we're not going to have any direct conflicts, we're not going to employ them for that issue. We wanted to make sure that they can continue to do our water acquisition work for us, and they will continue to do that. So I wanted you to be aware of the status of that as well. And then at this time, just so you all know, the city attorney's office is basically at 50% capacity. Obviously, we're going to be recruiting our new city attorney, but also Brian Swan in the office is at this point out indefinitely for medical reasons, and I don't know when he'll be returning. So Sarah Geiger and I are trying to do everything we can to stay up to speed and utilizing outside counsel a little bit quicker and more than what I anticipated needing, but we're just trying to pour through things and support staff as much as we possibly can. I think that's all I have to report for you this evening. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you. Does any council members have any questions for our city manager, or city attorney, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, are there any council members wishing to make a report? Council Member Ford?
Yeah, just report that over the weekend, the Historical Society had their annual meeting, and I attended that event. And then Rotary, I've been at the last couple of meetings. Their annual Christmas party is this weekend.
Thank you. Council Member Madera?
Yeah, I had a CML Policy Committee meeting on Friday, and to start setting the direction for legislation that's starting to come down the pipeline. There wasn't anything outside the ordinary for the most part. CML took staff's recommended position on these bills, so those will be coming forward once we start discussing our legislative agenda. I also met with the RAC, and then I met with the Housing Authority Director to discuss the concerns at Village Crest and different things that we can do to help the residents. And one big thing that I made sure to mention was to avoid any type of retaliation. No complaints are ever made in a specific name or unit whenever they reach out to CHAPA for that reason, and they file general complaints on behalf of the residents when they get to that point. Also, going along with that, we did talk about if we want to regulate some of the housing in the city, it would have to be done, by ordinance. But it wouldn't just affect, affordable housing. So if we were to pass ordinances for this, it would apply citywide. And so, that could affect affordable housing stock going forward. And so it's just something that, been discussing and is important to address. So, as I learn more, I'll report back.
Any other council members wishing to make a report? Okay, Councilmember Noble.
I attended the Senior Commission meeting, and they have put together a brilliant strategy plan draft that they hope to make public so that there can be feedback on it. It was really very impressive. It should be quite an exciting year. I also attended the Commerce City Historical Society event on Saturday, and got quite a kick out of hearing stories from folks who've been here forever. Also, I was very excited as well about the decision regarding the anti-degradation. And I do believe also, Mr. Hayter, that they're not allowing grandfathering as part of the language. So if the Water Quality Control Commission decides against their ruling of a year ago, then it will not, none of the language will be grandfathered that Suncor, for example, has been operating under, if it passes in September.
Thank you, Councilmember Noble. I can provide some clarification. The Water Quality Control Commission's position is that any hearing that is presented or any information and evidence that is presented by the petitioners at a future meeting will be considered as new information, and that the actions that were taken in June of 2020 are just that, actions taken then, and any new determinations, recommendations, or proposals would be those that go forward with respect to Regulation 38.
Okay. And then lastly, after consulting with our city attorney, I did post 2 public notifications about 2 final plats. And the question that I think that keeps arising in my mind is, and it doesn't have to be answered tonight, but how can residents be involved sooner in the planning than in the last 10 days before approval or denial or modification or whatever happens at 5 p.m. on the scheduled day? So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just have a few things I want to bring up. I also attended the Senior Commission meeting last Thursday, and they have a lot of exciting things going on. And then also on Last Friday, I met with Scott McFraden from Prospect. He's attempting to develop the property at 701 Colorado Boulevard, and it seems like a neat potential project that could, become hopefully a reality in Commerce City. And then just last, wanted to thank everyone for their assistance with helping me with my first meeting as Mayor Pro Tem and the city staff. So just wanted to say thank you for that, and thank you. And if anyone has anything else, I will adjourn this meeting. So thank you.
Yes.
Thanks. Okay.